In the basement, behind the barrels of herbs, stood a door that shouldn't have been there. It was low, with a copper slot for a coin, and an inscription in Korean in a world where Korean doesn't exist. A single entrance, one coin, and in the dying boy's fist lay exactly one bronze coin. Park Min-jae blinks. A reed ceiling, the smell of wormwood and urine. A stranger's hand hangs before his face. A child's. Blue. Veins show through in the light. He tries to move his fingers won't obey. His body weighs like an empty rice sack, and every breath comes out with a wheeze. A thin man with sunken eyes sits nearby and brings a wooden spoon to his lips. Father, the word comes to mind on its own, not from the memory of a 7-year-old, from a place where Min-jae knew very different ceilings. The decoction touches his lips, and his tongue reads the ingredients on its own. Sage, licorice root, something like ginseng, but weaker, brewed in hard water, effective at 20% at best. Min-jae swallows and closes his eyes. His body is dying. He feels it not with fear, but with certainty. Second-degree dystrophy, dehydration, possibly a congenital defect in the meridians. Father is doing what he can, but he's treating the symptom, not the cause. He needs protein, he needs zinc, he needs iron, he needs 2 weeks to avoid dying a second time. Dr. Park. That's what they call him in the Tonagol. A kind man, a weak doctor. He treats neighbors on credit and loses every other patient. The town soothsayer told him to his face, "The son won't live to see his 8th spring. Don't get attached." Father got attached. You can tell by the way the spoon trembles, by the way the man tucks in the blanket as if the child were molded from wet clay. Come nightfall, the father collapses to sleep right on the floor by the mat. Min-jae lies there and listens. Behind the wall, people are coughing. Not just one person, several. A child's cough, wet and frequent. The Tonagol neighborhood, the lower valley on the outskirts of the town of Songju, a place where children are born on bare earth, eat millet mixed with sand, and die by their first winter. Min-jae sits down. His head is spinning. The walls are swimming. He presses his palms against the mat, waits it out, then stands up. His legs feel like dry twigs. Every step sends a dull pain through his knees, but he walks on. Toward the door to the basement. His father keeps dried herbs there. Min-jae knows this, not from the boy's memory. He knows it by the smell. The basement breathes chamomile and bark. He counts the steps. 1, 2, 5, 7. On the 8th, the basement ends, and what cannot be here begins. That very door, wooden, low, with a copper slit in the middle, and the inscription glows copper in the darkness. One entrance, one coin. Min-jae holds the coin up to the slot. His hand trembles, not from fear, from weakness. A click, the door swings open. Light hits his eyes, not bright, warm, like in a pharmacy an hour before closing. He steps inside. An indoor market the size of a trading floor, rows of stalls without vendors, shelves stretch upward into the darkness where there is no ceiling. On each one, vials, packets, boxes, and on every price tag, Korean letters. Basic rehydration solution, 1 coin. High-protein soybeans, 1 coin. Field 4 drip, 1 coin. Children's antibiotic, 1 coin. B vitamins with zinc, 1 coin. He walks past 3 rows, then 5. Then he loses count. That's all there is. Everything he knew from the reference books. Everything he was taught during 6 years at university and 20 years behind the pharmacy counter. And 1 price tag for everything. 1 coin per item. 1 purchase per day. Min-jae freezes in the middle of the market. He's shaking. His 7-year-old body can't hold him up, and he sits right down on the stone floor. All around him are cures for everything. For anemia, for diphtheria, for tuberculosis, for starvation, and only 1 move a day. This isn't cheating, it's a chess game. He made the wrong choice and lost a day. He lost a day, and someone behind the wall coughed for the last time. He is dying. 19 children in the neighborhood are dying. His father is dying, not from illness, from helplessness. What to buy first? The answer is obvious. Min-jae stands up. He takes a vial of clear liquid from the shelf. Basic solution for the dying. Saline with glucose and potassium salts. He presses the bottle to his chest and heads for the exit. The door closes behind him with a soft click. In the morning, his father is already awake. He's heating water for another useless concoction. Min-jae sits down across from him and places the bottle on the floor between them. Father looks at the vial. At his son, back at the vial. He asks where he got it. Min-jae says he found it in the basement. Father frowns. There's nothing like that in the basement. Min-jae doesn't argue. He asks to inject the liquid into a vein. The father recoils. Into a vein? On a child? His son? Min-jae silently rolls up his sleeve. He feels for a vein on his skinny arm. He asks his father for a thin, hollow needle. The man's hands are shaking more than the boy's. Min-jae inserts the needle himself, with a child's fingers, with a memory a 7-year-old could not possibly have. A clear liquid flows through the tube into the vein. He lies down and closes his eyes. His father sits down beside him and stays there all night, without blinking, only his son's breathing, steady and calm. By dawn, something happens that Dr. Park hasn't seen in 30 years. The boy's cheeks turn pink, not a fever, a living color, like that of a healthy child. For the first time in 7 years, the father holds his hand over his son's face, hovering without touching, as if afraid to scare him away. Min-jae opens his eyes and speaks softly. Father, there are 19 more children like this in our neighborhood. I know what they need. Give me a year. The father covers his face with his hands and trembles. Min-jae his small hand on his father's knee and waits. People are still coughing behind the wall, but now he hears that coughing differently, not as a death sentence, as a to-do list. The soybeans sprouted on the 4th day. Min-jae stood over the garden bed and counted the sprouts. 47. Out of 50 seeds planted, a 94% germination rate. For an early maturing variety in clay soil, it was almost a miracle. In 2 weeks, the first pods would be ready. In 3, he'd be able to make milk. But the children were coughing now. Not in 3 weeks. Now. Every morning, Min-jae stepped out onto the porch and listened to the neighborhood. He counted the sounds. A cough on the left. That's Miller Pei's house. His daughter Mi-yeon is 3. She has bronchitis on top of malnutrition. Crying on the right. That's Weaver Hong's house. Her son, Tae-gon, is 5. He's developed rickets. His bones are soft. His legs are bowing. Silence across the way. That's the worst of all. Silence means the child has stopped crying because he has no strength left. Min-jae went down to the basement every day. 1 coin, 1 item. On the 4th day, he bought a bag of mineral salt. On the 5th day, a package of dried sprouted grains. On the 6th, a powdered vitamin concentrate. He couldn't buy medicine for each child separately. 1 purchase per day. So he had to think differently. Not treat the disease. Treat the cause of the disease. And there was only one cause. Hunger. If he gave the body the material to recover, it would recover on its own. Not completely, not quickly, but enough to buy some time. Min-jae started with the simplest thing. He dissolved the mineral salt in boiled water. He added a pinch of vitamin powder. The result was a solution. Unappealing, cloudy. It smelled strange, but it contained exactly what was needed. Potassium, sodium, glucose, zinc. He took the first portion to Yeon-soo's mother. The woman looked at the murky liquid in the clay cup with an expression as if she'd been offered poison. Min-jae explained. He said it was a drink for the child, that she should give her a sip every hour, that in 3 days, the girl would start eating on her own. The woman asked how much it cost. Min-jae replied that it was free. She didn't believe him. Nothing is free in Tunagol. Even water from the well cost time because of the line. Min-jae didn't try to convince her. He simply left the cup and walked away. That evening, his father asked why he was giving away supplies. They were barely surviving themselves. There wasn't enough for the 2 of them, and yet he was feeding strangers. Min-jae replied that there were no such things as strangers' children. His father fell silent. For a long time. Then he said that his son had grown up too soon. Min-jae said nothing. If only his father knew just how soon. On the 10th day, Yeon-soo sat up on her own for the first time. Her mother ran to the Park family's house at dawn. She pounded on the door and called for the doctor. Her father came out. He thought the child was getting worse, but the woman was laughing. She stood in the doorway, laughing and crying, and said that Yeon-soo had asked for food. By herself. Asked. To eat. Father turned to his son. Min-jae was sitting at the table, pounding dried beans in a mortar. He didn't look up, but his hand froze for a moment. That was the first sign. On the 12th day, the soybean pods had gained weight. Min-jae gathered the first handful. He soaked them overnight. In the morning, he ground them into a paste. He added boiled water. He strained it through a cloth. Soy milk, cloudy, warm, with a distinctive beanie aftertaste. The protein content was 3 times higher than in the millet porridge they fed the children here. He poured the milk into 5 cups. He took it to 5 addresses: Youngsu, Taegon, Miyeon, Changho, Subin, the 5 in the worst condition. The mothers took the milk in silence. They no longer asked how much it cost. Something had changed. Word spread through the neighborhood. Dr. Park's son was doing something. No one really understood what exactly, but the children by the well had stopped looking like corpses. In the second week, a neighbor came to the Park's house. Miller Bay, a big man with heavy hands. He stood at the gate and waited. He didn't come in. Min-jae went out to meet him. The miller looked down at this skinny boy with rosy cheeks and said nothing. Then he said his daughter's cough had almost gone away, and he asked how he could help. Min-jae answered right away. He needed a mill, a hand mill, a small one, to grind grain into flour and soybeans into powder. The miller nodded. 2 days later, there was a mill standing by the Park family's house, an old one with a cracked millstone, but it worked. Min-jae could now grind soybeans into powder and mix them with the grain. That changed everything. Powder keeps. Milk sours in a day. Powder can be handed out by the spoonful. Milk has to be carried in a cup and carried quickly. By the 3rd week, Min-jae had drawn up a schedule. Morning, grinding, soaking, preparing the solution, distribution. Daytime, working in the garden, watering, weeding. Evening, rounds, every house, every child. He sat down next to them. He looked at their tongues and nails and the whites of their eyes. He checked their pulse. He asked what they had eaten and how many times they had gone to the bathroom. His father walked with him. He was silent. He watched as his 7-year-old son did what he himself hadn't been able to do for 30 years. One evening, his father sat down on the doorstep and said he was proud. Then he paused and added that he was ashamed, that he had spent his whole life treating people, but in reality had just been throwing up his hands. That his son had done more in 2 weeks than he had in his entire career. Min-jae sat down beside him. He was silent for a long time. Then he replied that his father hadn't just thrown up his hands. He had held people's hands as they died, and that was healing too, just a different kind. His father said nothing. He simply placed his hand on his son's head, the doctor's heavy, warm hand. Min-jae closed his eyes and thought that in his past life he hadn't had a father. There had been catalogs and shifts and an empty apartment, but now there was a hand on his head, and that was worth more than anything on the coin market. By the end of the 1st month, 4 of the 19 children were already getting up from their mats. Youngsu was walking on her own. Taegon had started eating solid food. Miyeon was laughing. Changho got into a fight with a neighborhood boy over a stick. Min-jae found out about it and smiled for the first time ever, because a child who fights over a stick is a living child. Dead children don't fight over sticks. One night, he lay on a mat and counted. 1 coin a day, 30 a month. He spent 30 coins in the 1st month, 20 of them on food and solution, 5 on tools, 3 on seeds. 2 were wasted, mistakes. He bought disinfectant powder that turned out to be too strong for children's wounds. He bought burn ointment that nobody needed. 2 coins, 2 days lost. In a world where children cough every hour, that's a lot. He couldn't afford to make mistakes. 1 move every day, the right move. On the morning of the 1st month, a strange woman came to their house. An old woman, in a dark cloak. She asked for Dr. Park. Father came out. The woman looked at him, then at Min-jae, who was standing behind him. She looked at the boy for a long time. Then she said she had come from the Wonegol neighborhood on the other side of Songju, that children were dying there too, that she had heard that Dr. Park's son performed miracles. Min-jae stepped forward. He asked how many children there were. The woman answered, 12. Min-jae nodded. He said he couldn't come yet, but in 2 weeks he would send soybean powder and instructions. The woman looked at him with an expression Min-jae knew well, an adult looking at a child and not understanding why the child speaks like an adult. Then she nodded and left. Min-jae stood by the gate and watched her go. 19 children in Tunagol, 12 in Wonagol. That makes 31. 1 coin a day. He closed his eyes and began counting again. She was lying by the neighborhood gate, face down, in a pool of her own blood. Min-jae saw her at dawn as he was walking to the well. Young, tall, with a short haircut and torn gray clothes. A sword lay nearby. It had fallen from her hand. There was someone else's blood on the blade. Her own was on her. The wound ran diagonally down from her right shoulder across her shoulder blade. Deep, ragged edges. A chop. Someone had struck her from above with a heavy blade. Min-jae crouched down. He checked her pulse at her neck. It was there. Weak. Fast. Blood loss. Pain shock. If he didn't stop the bleeding, it would be too late in half an hour. He ran home. His legs had grown stronger over the past month, but he still ran like a sick kitten. He burst into the house. He woke his father. He said there was a wounded woman lying by the gate and she needed help. His father jumped up immediately. A healer doesn't ask questions when a person is dying. The two of them carried her into the house. His father carried her in his arms. Min-jae walked beside him, pressing a piece of cloth against the wound. The blood soaked through the cloth in a minute. Min-jae sent his father to fetch boiling water and a clean cloth. He went down to the basement himself. A coin. A click. The market. He walked quickly. Past the shelves of herbs. Past the surgical kits. He stopped. Surgical absorbable catgut. A needle for deep wounds. 1 coin. 1 purchase per day. That meant he wouldn't be able to buy anything else until tomorrow. No antibiotics. No painkillers. Just catgut and a needle. He grabbed the package and ran out. Upstairs, his father had already cleaned the wound. Min-jae took a look. The wound was cleaner than he'd expected. Smooth. Didn't touch the bone. But deep. He told his father he would stitch it up. His father froze. He looked at the boy's hands. Small. Childlike. He asked if he knew how. Min-jae didn't answer. He threaded the needle. He sterilized the needle with boiling water. He sat down next to the injured woman. She was unconscious, and that was a good thing, because he didn't have any anesthetic. He began to stitch. Stitch by stitch. His hands trembled with tension. His fingers were too short. Min-jae gritted his teeth and kept going. 12 stitches. Even. Neat. His father stood over him, holding his breath. When the last stitch was pulled tight, Min-jae leaned back. His hands were shaking. His vision was blurry, but the suture was good. Clean. There wouldn't be an infection if he washed it regularly. The woman woke up by evening. She opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the boy sitting next to her, grinding something in a mortar. She tried to sit up. Min-jae told her not to move. His voice was calm, like that of a man who had said it 1,000 times, because he had. 20 years behind the counter, thousands of people he'd told not to run around after a shot, and not to mix antibiotics with alcohol. The woman looked at him strangely. She asked who he was. Min-jae replied that he was Dr. Park's son. She asked who had stitched her up. He replied that he had. She was silent for a moment. Then she said her name was Soa, that she had come from the west, that she was being chased by people from a clan she no longer belonged to, that she had to leave in the morning so as not to bring trouble upon herself. Min-jae nodded. Then he asked when she had last eaten. Soa didn't answer. You could tell by her eyes that it had been a long time. Min-jae stood up. He went into the kitchen. He returned with a bowl, rice with soy milk and a pinch of salt. A simple meal, the simplest of all. He set the bowl down beside her. Soa looked at the food, then at the boy. Her hand reached for the bowl and paused. She said she couldn't pay. Min-jae replied that she didn't have to. She ate slowly. That's people who haven't eaten in a long time eat, in small sips, closing her eyes with each one. Min-jae left the room. He let her be alone. In the morning, Soa got up. She shouldn't have. The wound wouldn't let her, but she got up. She found her sword. She fastened it to her belt. She went out to the gate. Min-jae was standing in the yard, watering the garden. Soa approached him. She said she was leaving. She said she would repay the debt someday. Min-jae didn't turn around. He asked where she was going. Soa fell silent. He asked if she had a home. She didn't answer. He asked if anyone was waiting for her. Silence. Min-jae finally turned around. He looked up at her. A little boy was looking up at a tall swordswoman with a scar across her eyebrow. He said there wasn't a single person in the neighborhood who knew how to handle a weapon, that there would be famine in the winter and looters, that he needed someone at the gate. Soa frowned. She asked if he was offering her a job. A 7-year-old boy was offering her a job. Min-jae shrugged. He said he was offering shelter and food and people who needed protection, and it was up to her to decide what to call it. Soa stood at the gate for a full minute. She looked out at Tonagol Street, at the crooked houses, at the woman with a child by the well, at the vegetable patch in the doctor's yard. Then, silently, she took the sword from her belt. She placed it next to the gate. She sat down on the threshold. Min-jae nodded and went back to the garden. They didn't say another word to each other until evening. In the evening, Min-jae brought her a bowl of soup. So-ah took it. She ate slowly. Min-jae left. The next day she was at the gate. The day after that, too. A week later, the neighborhood children had gotten used to the tall, silent woman at the east of the Park family's house and stopped avoiding her. Miyeon was the first to approach and hold out a yellow flower to her. So-ah looked at the flower, at the child. She took it, tucked it behind her ear. Miyeon laughed and ran off. So-ah sat there with the flower behind her ear until evening. She didn't take it out. Min-jae saw this through the window and said nothing. So-ah began walking around the neighborhood in the mornings. She checked the fences. She repaired the gates. One day, some boys from the next street came to steal soybeans from the garden. So-ah went out. Without saying a word, she stood between them and the garden. The boys saw the scar and ran away. They didn't touch the garden anymore. Min-jae watched. He could tell by the way she walked that the wound still hurt. He could tell by the way she turned her whole body instead of just her head. Every evening he left a bowl for her on the doorstep, silently. Every morning the bowl was there, washed clean. They hardly spoke. 2 weeks later, Min-jae approached her one evening. He sat down beside her. He asked her to pull the top of her clothing off her right shoulder. He needed to check the scar. So-ah froze. Min-jae waited. She slowly pulled the fabric off her shoulder. The scar was healing well, clean, a smooth scar. Min-jae examined it and nodded. He said she'd be able to train in a month. So-ah asked how he knew she was training. Min-jae replied that she had calluses on her palms from the hilt and tendon strain on her right forearm. It was the body of someone who worked with a sword every day. So-ah looked at her palms, then at the boy. He told her this in the same tone one uses to talk about the weather, as if reading a body through calluses and tendons were normal for a 7-year-old. She asked where it hurt, not her, him. Min-jae didn't understand the question. So-ah repeated it. Everyone around her asks where others are hurting. He was the first to ask where she was hurting. Now she's asking. Min-jae paused. He replied that he was fine. So-ah nodded. She didn't believe him, but she didn't press the issue. That night, Min-jae lay on his mat and thought. He had 1 month before the cold weather set in. The neighborhood would survive the winter only if they stockpiled enough soybeans and grain, and if the walls remained intact. He had a sword bearer at the gate. He had a father who had begun to believe. He had 4 of his 19 children still on their feet, and he had 1 coin a day. It wasn't enough, but that was where they started. The coins were running out. Min-jae sat by the hearth and counted them in his palm. 7 of them, all that remained of what his father had collected over the years. Bronze discs with a square hole in the middle, light, warm from his hands. 7 days, 7 purchases, and then that was it. He had to earn money. There was no money in Tonagol. The neighborhood lived by barter. A sack of millet for a roof repair, a bundle of firewood for doing laundry. Only those who traded with the city of Songju had money. And in Songju, the House of the White Lily ruled. Min-jae thought for 3 days. He weighed his options. Sell soy milk? The volume was too small. The garden barely produced enough for 19 children. Sell medical treatments. Without a license from the city council, that was punishable by a fine and confiscation. Sell knowledge. There was no one to sell it to. The answer came on the 4th day. In the morning, Min-jae went down to the basement and bought one thing, a grain sprouting kit, instructions, trays, cheesecloth, wheat seeds. He went back upstairs and got to work. Wheat grains soaked for 12 hours sprout in 2 days. The sprouts contain 4 times more vitamins than the grain itself, 6 times more folic acid. Sprouted grain doesn't need to be ground. It can be eaten raw, or dried and sold as a dietary supplement. In a world where ascension pills cost a fortune and a simple vitamin supplement doesn't exist in principle, this was gold. 2 days later, Min-jae received the first batch, a handful of pale green sprouts, delicate, fragile. He dried them in the sun, ground them into powder. It amounted to a pinch, green, with a grassy scent. He tasted it on his tongue, bitter, fresh. It works. Now he needed So-ah. Min-jae found her at the gate. She was sitting in her usual spot. He sat down next to her and explained the plan. So-ah listened in silence. The plan was simple. Go to Songju, to the market. Sell the sprouted grain as a vitamin supplement. Soa asked who would be selling it. Min-jae replied that he would. Soa looked down at him, a 7-year-old boy at the city market. She didn't argue. The next morning, they left the neighborhood. Min-jae carried a small box on his back. Inside the box were 10 small packets of powder, 1 packet per serving. Soa walked beside him, a sword at her belt. It was a 2-hour walk to Songju. For Min-jae, 3. His legs still got tired quickly. Halfway there, he stopped to catch his breath. Soa sat down silently. She offered her back. Min-jae looked at her. He understood. He shook his head. He said he'd make it on his own. Soa didn't insist. She stood up. She walked on, more slowly, matching his pace. The Songju market spanned 3 streets. Noise, crowds, the smells of fried dough and spices. Min-jae found an open spot at the edge of the market, next to an old man's stall selling brooms. He laid out the bags on a cloth. Soa stood behind him. She crossed her arms. For the first hour, no one come by, nor in the second. A boy with a bag of green powder. Who needs this? Around noon, a middle-aged woman stopped. She looked at the powder. She asked what it was. Min-jae replied, "Sprouted grain. It contains substances that strengthen the blood and bones. 1 pinch a day in porridge or water." The woman frowned. She asked if they were pills. Min-jae replied that it wasn't. It's not a pill or medicine. It's food. Just food that's healthier than usual. The woman asked how much it cost. 1 bronze coin per packet. The woman snorted. A coin for a pinch of green dust. She left. Min-jae wasn't upset. He had expected this. By sunset, he had sold 2 packets, 2 coins. The buyers were an old woman with aching joints and a young mother with a pale baby. Neither had come for the powder. They had come because the boy had looked at them and said he could see it in their faces. To the old woman, he said that her finger joints were swollen and the powder would help with the inflammation. To the mother, he said the baby had pale gums and the powder would give him the iron he was lacking. They didn't buy the powder. They bought the fact that the little boy had seen their pain. On the way back, Soa walked in silence. Then she asked how he knew the old woman's joints were aching. Min-jae replied that he could tell by the thickening of the phalanges and the redness around the knuckles. Soa was silent for a moment. She said that normal children don't talk like that. Min-jae replied that he wasn't a normal child. Soa nodded. She didn't ask any more questions. On the next market day, he sold 5 packets. A week later, 10. 2 weeks later, a small line began to form at his market stall. Not for the powder. For the boy who looks at you and tells you what's wrong with you. For free. They bought the powder later, because if he sees the illness, maybe he knows the cure too. Min-jae knew what he was doing. 20 years behind a pharmacy counter had taught him. People don't need a pill. People need someone to look at them and say, "I can see you're not well." The pill comes later. First, the look. A month later, he had 40 coins. 40 days at the market. But the money was only half the story. The other half was more important. A name. People began to recognize him. The son of Dr. Park from Tonggaegol. The boy who sees illnesses. The little pharmacist. That name would reach the ears of the House of the White Lily. Min-jae knew, but he had no choice. To save 31 children, he needed coins. To earn coins, he had to prove himself. To prove himself, he had to attract attention. And attention always attracts both those who like you and those who don't. One evening, a man approached his stall at the market, well-dressed, in a dark hanbok with embroidery, rings on his fingers, a smile on his face. He asked whose boy this was and who had allowed him to trade without a license. Min-jae looked at him. The embroidery on the hanbok, a white lily, the symbol of the apothecary cartel. Min-jae neatly gathered his little bags. He bowed. He said he was the son of Dr. Park, that he wasn't selling medicine, but a dietary supplement, that according to market regulations, dietary supplements don't require a license. The man stopped smiling. He looked more closely. A little boy quoting market regulations. Then he smiled again, wider. He said he would remember that name, Pak. He left. So A placed her hand on the hilt of her sword and didn't remove it until they reached home. 3 months after waking up, Min-jae sat in the basement and looked at the shelves of the coin market. He hadn't come for medicine. He had come for a prescription, a book of pill recipes, the basic pharmacopoeia. 1 coin. He took the thin scroll, unrolled it right on the market floor. 120 recipes, herbal bases, mineral additives, pressing methods, firing temperature, drying time, dosages, all in Korean, all in a system of measurement he understood, and all of this was the key to the next step, pills, not the ones sold by the House of the White Lily. Those cost a family's monthly earnings and contained, at best, a third of the claimed ingredients. Min-jae knew this because, after a month of trading at the market, he had seen dozens of people who took counterfeit pills and felt no improvement. He asked to see a pill. He sniffed it, rubbed it between his fingers, tasted it with the tip of his tongue, and every time, he thought the same thing. Half the composition is filler, a quarter is cheap herbs added for the scent, and only a quarter is the active ingredient, in a dilution that produces a placebo effect and nothing more. Min-jae closed the scroll. He went upstairs. That evening he called his father. He laid out 4 items on the table in front of him: a handful of dried herbs from his father's stash, powdered sprouted grain, a small clay crucible, and the scroll. His father looked at them. Min-jae said he wanted to make pills, his own, different ones, better than what the cartel sells, cheaper, more effective, and signed with the name of the person they're made for. His father was silent for a long time. Then he asked if his son understood what that meant. Making pills without the Alchemists Guild's permission isn't just a fine, it's a fine. Min-jae nodded. He said he knew, but he asked his father one thing. How many patients had he lost over 30 years because they couldn't afford the cartel's pills? His father didn't answer. He just looked at his hands, a doctor's long fingers, with stains from herbs etched into the skin, hands that had held the dying, many, too many. His father said he would help. Min-jae set to work. The first pill was for Yeon-soo. The girl was 3 years old, iron deficiency anemia. Min-jae sat down and laid out the ingredients, took root from his father's stock, an analog of astragalus, strengthens blood production, powdered sprouted grain, a source of folic acid and iron, a drop of honey as a binder, dried berries his father had gathered in the fall, high in vitamin C to aid iron absorption. He ground everything in a mortar, mixed it, added a drop of water. He rolled it into a small ball, dried it on a warm stone by the hearth. The pill turned out ugly. Dark green, lumpy. It smelled of grass and honey. Not at all like the smooth, white pills from the House of the White Lily in their lacquered boxes. Min-jae picked up a brush. He dipped it in ink. He wrote on the wrapping paper, Yeon-soo, 3 years, blood. 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening. 7 days. He took the pill to Yeon-soo's mother. He explained how to administer it. The mother looked at the lumpy green pill and the beautiful letters on the paper. She asked why her daughter's name was on the paper. Min-jae replied that it was because the pill was made for Yeon-soo, not for anemia in general, for Yeon-soo, who is 3 years old and loves catching butterflies in the yard. The mother silently took the pill. A week later, for the first time in her life, Yeon-soo didn't gasp for breath after walking. Min-jae began making pills for the others, every evening, 1 at a time, for each child. Taegon, 5 years old, rickets. A pill with calcium from crushed seashells and vitamins from fish oil. Mi-yeon, 3 years old, chronic bronchitis. A pill with an expectorant blend and honey. Chang-ho, 4 years old, dermatitis from malnutrition. A pill with zinc and seed oil. Each pill is labeled with a name. Every prescription is written in a notebook that Min-jae bound together from scraps of paper. His father helped, silently, grinding, mixing, dried. Didn't ask where his son knew the formulas from, just did it. One evening, Min-jae caught him with the notebook. His father was sitting and reading the recipes, running his finger along the lines. His face was like that of a man who had spent his whole life digging a well with a stick and then saw a shovel. By the end of the 2nd month, all 19 children in the neighborhood were on the program. Pills and soy milk and sprouted grains. 15 out of 19 were on their feet, running, fighting over sticks, laughing. 4 were still lying down but breathing steadily and feeding themselves. Word had spread beyond the neighborhood. One evening, 5 families from the village across the river came to the gates of Tonagol, with children in their arms. Min-jae went out to meet them. He looked at each child. He gave each one a diagnosis. He promised each one a pill. The families left and returned 3 days later for the pills. They paid with whatever they could: eggs, flour, cloth. One woman brought a live chicken. Min-jae took the chicken. It became the first in the chicken coop that Soa built behind the house out of old planks. The chicken laid eggs. Eggs contain protein, choline, and vitamin D. Min-jae added eggs to the children's diet. The circle was complete. Treatment brings health. Health brings work. Work brings coins. Coins buy medicine from the market. Medicine provides treatment. Min-jae began recording expenses and income, every coin, every egg, every sack of grain. A pharmacist is, first and foremost, about accounting, batches, expiration dates, suppliers, margin. In a world where merchants counted on their fingers, this was a weapon. One morning, an unfamiliar girl came to him, young, with a sharp chin and a proud bearing, her hair pinned up with chopsticks. She stood by the gate and looked at the soybean patch, at the chicken coop, at the rope with dried herbs. So went out to her, placed her hand on the hilt. The girl wasn't afraid. She looked at the swordswoman calmly. She said she was looking for a boy who makes pills. Min-jae came out of the house. The girl looked at him, then at the notebook in his hands, at the herbal stains on his fingers. She said her name was Chodin, that she was from the Cho clan, an alchemical clan, a former one. She said she had come for the recipe for the morning pill. Min-jae looked at her closely, pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, trembling hands, but not from fear, from hunger. He asked when she had last eaten. Chodin clenched her teeth. She replied that it was none of his business. Min-jae nodded. He asked who she needed the prescription for. Chodin was silent. Then she said it was for her brother, her younger brother, who is 10 years old, whose fever hasn't gone down for 3 weeks, whom the city doctors have written off as a dying patient and refused to treat. She said she had no money and that she knew the prescription cost more than she could afford, but she was willing to do anything. Min-jae looked at her. He saw her chin trembling, how her fingers were clenching the fabric on her thigh until her knuckles turned white. A proud girl from a noble family stood before a 7-year-old boy, ready to beg, because her brother was dying. Min-jae went into the house. He returned 10 minutes later. He was carrying 3 items: a bowl of rice and soy milk, a pill wrapped in paper with an inscription, and a scroll. He set the bowl in front of Chodin. He placed the pill next to it. He handed her the scroll. He said, "This is food. Eat. This is a pill for your brother. It reduces and restorative. Give it morning and evening. And this is the recipe for the morning pill, complete, with dosages. Take it." Chodin looked at him. She didn't move. Then she asked why. Why was he giving her the recipe, one that was worth a fortune, for free? Min-jae sat down on the threshold. He looked up at her and replied that the recipe was worthless if a child was dying while you haggled. Chodin took the bowl. She began to eat. She stopped halfway through the bowl. She closed her eyes. Her shoulders shook. She was crying, quietly, silently. Tears fell into the rice. Soa turned away. Min-jae waited. When Chodin finished eating, he said one more thing, that he needed an alchemist, someone who knew the theory and techniques for working with the ingredients of this world, someone who could scale his recipes from 1 pill to 100, someone with whom he could argue about the substance of things. Chodin looked up at him with reddened eyes. Min-jae held out his hand, a small one, a child's hand, with grass stains on the fingers. He said, "Heal your brother, then come back." Chodin looked at his hand, then at the scroll in her own hand, then at the bowl where some rice still remained. She stood up, took the pill and the scroll, and left without looking back. She approached Min-jae with asked if he was sure he hadn't given the prescription to a thief. Min-jae replied that she wasn't a thief. She's a sister. And a sister who's willing to steal for her brother is the best worker of all possible ones. Soa snorted. 10 days later, Chodin returned, with her brother. The boy was still pale but standing on his own 2 feet, and his fever had broken. Chodin stood at the gate, upright, with dry eyes. She said she had come to work. Min-jae nodded. He led her into the basement. He showed her his notebook. 120 recipes. Chodin read for 3 hours in silence. Then she looked up and said there was a mistake in the 14th recipe. That Aksu root should be mixed with mountain poppy pollen because they're antagonists, and instead of strengthening the body, they suppress breathing. Min-jae smiled, for the first time in a long while, broadly, because she was right. He had left that mistake on purpose, as a test. Chodin saw his smile and understood everything. Her face flushed with anger. She said that testing an alchemist of the Cho clan as a student was an insult. Min-jae replied that it wasn't. It was respect, because he wouldn't entrust the test to someone he didn't consider his equal. Chodin opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She said nothing. Instead, she sat down at the table and began correcting the formula. They worked until dawn. The first batch of Tonagol morning pills was ready a week later, 20 of them, green, round, smooth. Chodin insisted on the smoothness. She said the pill should look like a pill, not like goat droppings. Min-jae didn't argue. Each pill was labeled with a name. It cost 4 times less than the cartels. It was twice as potent. Min-jae stood in the courtyard and looked at the 20 small packets with names on them. Yeonsu, Taigon, Miyeon, Changho. 20 names, 20 lives. This was the beginning. The first buyer of the morning pill in Tone-gol, outside the neighborhood, was an old man named Jeong from the village of Mire. His knees had been hurting for 30 years. Every spring, he bought a pill from the House of the White Lily for 12 bronze coins. The pill helped for a week, then the pain returned. 12 coins, a week of relief. This system had been in place for 300 years, and no one had ever asked why a pill costing 12 coins only worked for 7 days. Old man Chon bought a Tone-gol pill for 3 coins. After a week, the pain hadn't returned. After 2 weeks, neither had it. A month later, old man Chon came again, not for a pill, with a gift. He brought a sack of flour and a clay pot of honey. He set them by the gate. He bowed. He said that for 30 years he had been deceived, yet he had paid and bowed. Min-jae came out to him. He looked at the old man's knees. He asked him to walk a bit. The old man took 10 steps. Min-jae nodded. He said that in 3 months the treatment would need to be repeated, but with different pills, for maintenance. The old man asked how much. Min-jae replied, 2 coins. The old man laughed, the hoarse laugh of a man who hadn't laughed in 30 years, a laugh of relief. After old man Jeong, others came, first one at a time, then in pairs and threes. By the end of the 3rd month, Chedin's workshop was working from dawn till dusk. She pounded the ingredients in a mortar, she dried them, she mixed, she pressed. Min-jae wrote the prescriptions, he checked the dosages, he signed each pill with the patient's name. Father Park received people at the gate, he listened to their complaints, he recorded their symptoms, he passed them on to his son. So A stood guard. It was a system, small, fragile, but it worked. Min-jae did the accounts every evening. Income, expenses, herb stock, number of patients. A second section appeared in the notebook next to the prescriptions. Bookkeeping. 40 coins a week. 20 went toward raw materials. 10 for food for the neighborhood. 5 for tools and repairs. 5 remained. 5 coins of net profit. Not much, but enough to go down to the basement every day and buy one thing. He wasn't buying medicine anymore. He was buying tools. Precise pharmacy scales. 1 coin, a set of measuring spoons. 1 coin, a heavy stone mortar. 1 coin, fine filter cloth. 1 coin. The workshop was growing. It had moved from the Pak family's basement to an annex that Miller Pai had built in 3 days with the help of 4 neighbors. Mud brick walls, a thatched roof, 2 tables, 4 shelves, a window for ventilation. Choi-rin entered the new workshop and stopped. She scanned the walls, the shelves, the window. Then she turned to Min-jae and said it was worse than a stable. Min-jae replied that a stable didn't have scales. Choi-rin snorted. But an hour later, she was arranging jars of ingredients on the shelves in an order that only she understood and that Min-jae memorized in a single minute. They argued every day about dosages, about drying methods, about firing temperatures. Choi-rin knew the theory of this world's alchemy better than anyone Min-jae had ever met. She knew which herbs combined according to the principle of yin and yang, which roots to gather at dawn and which at dusk, how to determine an ingredient's quality by its smell and how it breaks. Min-jae knew what she didn't: biochemistry, pharmacokinetics, how substances work at the cellular level. When he explained to her why the tuk root fortifies the blood, she listened with the expression of someone to whom a door is being opened into a room next to their own, one they never suspected existed. When she explained to him that the alchemical furnace operates on the flow of qi and that the temperature is regulated not by fire but by the master's concentration, he listened with the same expression. They complemented each other, 2 languages describing a single reality. One evening, Choi-rin said that recipe number 37 could be improved by replacing the dried root with a fresh one and adding a fermentation step. Min-jae thought for a moment. Fermentation. In pharmaceuticals, this increases bioavailability by 40%, but it adds 3 days to the production time. He asked if it was worth it. Choi-rin replied that the pill would become 1.5 times stronger. Min-jae nodded. 3 days for 1.5 times the potency. The math adds up. They reworked the recipe overnight. The new version of the pill was better, noticeably better. Cho-rin held the finished pill in the palm of her hand and looked at it the way one looks at a child who has opened its eyes for the first time. Min-jae signed the label. Park Yun-ho, 62 years old. Joints. Morning. 1. 14 days. He looked at Cho-rin. She looked at him. For the first time in 2 months of working together, there was no argument between them. Only silence. And the understanding that together they were doing what they couldn't do alone. A week later, what Min-jae had been waiting for and fearing happened. At the Songju market, 2 men approached his stall. Not customers. Min-jae knew that right away. From their gait, from the way they stood, broadly, taking up space. The first was short with a shaved head. The second was taller and broader. Both were dressed simply but wore good shoes. In this world, shoes revealed one's status more accurately than any embroidery. The man with the shaved head crouched down in front of Min-jae. He smiled. He said that Mr. Hwang Gi-so would like to speak with the young apothecary from Tonggol. Min-jae continued sorting the packets. He didn't look up. He asked what it was about. The man with the shaved head said it was about prospects for cooperation. Mr. Hwang values talent and doesn't like to waste it. Min-jae looked up. He looked the man with the shaved head in the eyes. Is this the same Mr. Hwang who heads the provincial branch of the White Lily House and set the price at 12 coins for a pill for joint pain when the cost of production is 2? The clean-shaven man stopped smiling. Min-jae continued. Is this the same Mr. Hwang whose pills contain 25% active ingredient? The rest is filler made of starch and chalk. The shaven man stood up. The second man took a step forward. Soa stood between them and Min-jae, in a single motion, without a sound, hand on the hilt. She didn't look at them menacingly. She looked at them the way a wall looks at the wind. The shaven man assessed the situation. He looked at Soa, at her sword, at the scar across her eyebrow. He decided today wasn't the day. They left. Soa stood there for another 10 minutes. She didn't move. Min-jae gathered the goods. They went home earlier than usual. On the way, Min-jae was silent. He was counting. Hwang Gi-sok had noticed him 2 months ago. He'd sent people. First, a watchman, now negotiators. The next step would be pressure, then threats, then mercenaries. Min-jae knew this pattern, not from this world, from the past. That's how monopolies operate. First, they offer you a way into the system. If you refuse, they break you. He needed time to become too big to be broken quietly. That evening, he sat down at the table and made a new list. Not children, not prescriptions. A list of what Tonggol needed to survive the next 6 months. A wall, a real one, made of fired brick, not made of clay that gets soggy after the rain. A stockpile of pills, enough for 3 months, for all the patients, people, more people, who would work and who needed to be fed and who would feed each other, and money, much more than there was now. He showed the list to Soa. She read it, looked up, asked if he was preparing for war. Min-jae shook his head. He replied that he was preparing to ensure there would be no war. Soa was silent for a moment, then she nodded. She said she would start training the men in the neighborhood, at least 10, at least with sticks. Min-jae nodded. Then he added that she didn't need men. She needed those who wanted to defend their home. Men or women, it didn't matter. Soa looked at him strangely. Then she said he was the first man to suggest she train women. Min-jae replied that he wasn't a man. He was 7 years old. Soa snorted. It was the sound that served as her laugh. Nambi emerged from the forest in the 4th month. Min-jae was the first to see her. He was walking from the well with a bucket of water, and at the edge of the path by the far gate stood a creature, small, dirty, with cat-like ears pressed against its head and a thin tail wrapped around its leg. A bundle hung from the creature's back. The bundle was moving. Min-jae set down the bucket. He stepped closer. A girl, about 15 years old but the size of a 12-year-old. Exhaustion had shrunk her body to skin stretched over bones. Her clothes were made of coarse burlap. Her feet were bare and rubbed raw. She looked at him with the expression of a cornered animal, ready to run or to fight. Min-jae didn't take another step. He stopped 3 paces away. He looked at the bundle on her back. The bundle was wrapped in the same burlap and tied with a rope. A small hand was sticking out of the bundle. A child's. Motionless, but warm. Alive. Min-jae looked at the hand, then at the girl. He asked how old the child was. The girl didn't answer. She clenched her teeth. Her ears pressed even tighter against her head. Min-jae sat down on the ground, right in the dust, to be lower than her, so as not to scare her. He repeated the question, calmly, quietly, the way you talk to someone holding a knife who is more afraid than angry. The girl swallowed. She said she was 5. Min-jae nodded. He asked if he could take a look. The girl didn't move. Min-jae waited. Then he said that the child had visible thickening on her wrists. It was a sign of rickets. The bones were softening from a lack of calcium and vitamins. If left untreated, her legs would become crooked and walking would be painful. But it was treatable. He could help. He needed 3 days. The girl looked at him. Her eyes were yellow with vertical pupils, cat-like. She was silent for a long time. Then she slowly sank to her knees. She took the bundle off her back. She unwrapped it. A little girl, about 5 years old, with the same little ears, with the same tail. She was asleep. Her breathing was heavy, raspy. Min-jae approached, carefully. He placed his hand on the child's forehead. A fever, not high, 38, maybe 38.5. He looked at her stomach, swollen. Parasites. He looked at her gums, pale as paper. Anemia, severe. He looked at her nails, spoon-shaped, koilonychia, 0 iron in her system. Min-jae raised his head. He told the girl with cat ears that her sister needed food and medicine and clean water and warmth, that he had all of that at his house, that he wouldn't ask where they were from, that he wouldn't ask who was chasing them, that he would ask only one thing, what her sister's name was. The girl blinked, then she answered, Danbi. Her name is Danbi, and her own name is Nambi. Min-jae stood up. He reached out his hand, not toward Nambi, toward the bucket of water. He lifted it. He said it wasn't far to go. Nambi hoisted her sister onto her back. She followed him, not right beside him, 3 steps behind. The way people walk when they're used to the person in front turning around and striking them. Min-jae didn't turn around. At home, Father Park took Danbi in without asking a single question. He laid her on a mat, covered her, gave her water. Min-jae went down to the basement, a coin, the market. He walked through the rows, searching. He found it. A children's anti-parasitic medication, broad spectrum, mild acting, 1 coin. He went back upstairs, dissolved a dose in warm water, gave it to Danbi to drink. The girl obediently drank it without opening her eyes. Nambi stood in the corner. She watched. She didn't sit down. She didn't eat. She didn't drink. Soa entered the house. She saw Nambi. She saw the ears, the tail. She stopped. She looked at Min-jae. Min-jae shook his head. Not now. Soa nodded. She went out. She stood by the door outside, with a sword, not from Nambi, for Nambi, in case someone came after them. Nambi hadn't eaten for 2 days. Min-jae placed food next to her. Rice, soy milk, sprouted grains. She didn't touch it. She only ate when everyone left the room. Min-jae found out because the bowls were empty when he returned. He understood. She couldn't eat in front of people. A habit, drilled in over the years. In the minds of the northern clan, half-breeds were fed separately from the people. Leftovers, in the dark, so they wouldn't see them eating, so they wouldn't get used to the idea that they were hungry too. Min-jae didn't change the routine. He just started setting out the food and leaving, every time, without a word. 3 days later, Danbi opened her eyes. Small yellow eyes with vertical pupils looked up at the thatched ceiling, then at Min-jae's face. The girl wasn't scared. 5-year-olds don't know how to be afraid properly yet. She asked where her sister was. Min-jae pointed to the corner where Nambi was crouching, staring at them without blinking. Danbi smiled, weakly, but she smiled. Then she asked if there was any food here. Min-jae brought rice with honey. Danbi ate slowly. Bee watched her sister eat in front of a stranger and didn't look away. Min-jae noticed. A week later, Danbi was walking through the courtyard. Nambi followed her like a shadow. The neighborhood children stared at her ears and tail with the kind of curiosity that only children have. Miyeon approached first. She touched Danbi's ear. Danbi giggled. Miyeon giggled back. An hour later, they were playing together. Nambi stood by the wall and watched. Min-jae walked over to her. He stood beside her, silently. They both watched as Dunbi ran after Mion around the courtyard. Min-jae said that Dunbi was healthy, that the rickets would go away in 2 months with proper nutrition, that the parasites had been treated, that the fever had subsided. Nambi was silent. Then she quietly asked if they could stay forever. Min-jae replied that they could stay as long as they wanted. Nambi asked what she had to do in return. Min-jae replied, nothing. For the first time, Nambi looked him in the eyes, straight on, for a long time. Then she said that things don't work that way, that you have to pay for everything, that she'd been taught that since she was 8, working in the mines, that free means they'll name the price later, and it'll be higher. Min-jae was silent. Then he said she was right. Nothing is free. The miller paid for the food Danbi eats with flour. Min-jae himself paid for the medicine with a coin. 4 neighbors who spent 3 days building the addition paid for the roof. None of this was free. But Nambi didn't pay for it. The people who decided that children in their neighborhood don't die paid for it. Any children, with or without ears. Nambi listened. Her hands were shaking. Min-jae said that if she wanted to repay him, he knew how. He needed someone who knew the forest, someone who could move quietly and see far, someone who could carry messages between villages faster than a man. Nambi could do all of that. He could tell by the way she moved, silently, by the way she was the first to hear footsteps on the street, by the way her pupils dilated in the dark. Nambi looked at her hands, small, with claws she hid in her fists so as not to scare anyone. Then she nodded. Min-jae nodded back. Within a month, Nambi knew every trail within a 10-mile radius of Tonagol, every ravine, every ford, every hollow where a note could be hidden. She became a courier, a shadow that no one saw, but who saw everyone. Soa taught her the basics of combat, not with a sword, with a knife. Nambi didn't want to kill. She wanted to run away. Soa understood. She taught her to dodge, to vanish, to hide. One evening, Min-jae was sitting on the doorstep. Nambi approached, silently. She sat down next to him, not 3 steps away, right next to him. For the first time, they sat and watched as Danbi taught Mion to do a somersault in the courtyard, and both of them fell and laughed. Nambi quietly said that in the mines, her sister wasn't called by her name. She was called a number, 137. Min-jae didn't turn his head. He just said that here she was called Danbi. Nambi fell silent. A minute later, her hand touched his shoulder, lightly, for a second. Then she stood up and left. Min-jae remained seated. He thought about how a touch that lasts a second can weigh more than words spoken for hours. By the 5th month, Tonggol had a population of 212 people. Min-jae knew the exact number because he kept a census. Every resident, name, age, health status, skills, how they could help. The census notebook lay next to the prescription notebook and the accounting notebook. 3 notebooks, 3 pillars: people, medicine, money. The neighborhood was changing. Min-jae saw it every day. Fences were being repaired. Roofs were being patched. There were no more bodies lying by the well. Children ran down the street, screaming and fighting over sticks, and it was the most beautiful sound Min-jae had heard in 2 lifetimes. But he knew this was just a lull. Hwang Gi-sok had been silent for 3 weeks now, following the failed negotiations at the market. Silence from a man who ran the cartel in the province did not mean submission. It meant planning. Min-jae was preparing. 1 coin every day, 1 purchase. He had stopped buying medicine and tools. He was buying materials. A brick mold, 1 coin. A blueprint for a kiln, 1 coin. A bag of special formula cement, 1 coin. Soa was training the militia. 22 people, 14 men, 8 women, sticks, pikes, 2 old swords, 1 shield. So-a looked at this army, and her expression didn't change. She lined them up every morning, taught them to stand, taught them not to run when they were scared, taught them that formation isn't the ability to fight, but the ability to believe that the person next to you won't run. Min-jae watched. Soa was a good teacher, patient, strict but fair. She didn't yell, she demonstrated. Once, twice, 10 times. until the body remembered. One evening, Min-jae asked her how many people it would take to hold the neighborhood. So thought for a moment. She replied that it depended on how many came. Min-jae said that, according to his calculations, Hwang Gi-sok could hire up to 100 mercenaries. The provincial branch's budget wouldn't allow for more. Soa was silent for a moment. She said that 100 mercenaries against 22 militiamen with sticks wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. Min-jae nodded. He said he knew. That's why they needed a wall. Soa looked at him. She asked if he was serious. A wall. Min-jae replied that he was serious, and that they would start building tomorrow. The whole neighborhood would help build it. Min-jae sketched out a plan. Not a fortress. A fence. 2 meters high, made of fired brick, with 2 gates, the main one to the south and a small one to the east. Only Nam-bi knew about the small gate, for retreat if necessary. They built the kiln in 3 days. They dug up the clay right there in the neighborhood. Miller Pei mixed the clay. Weaver Hong shaped the bricks. The children carried water. Even Cho Rin came out of the workshop and silently joined the line, passing bricks. She worked with the same focused expression she wore when grinding ingredients in a mortar. The work proceeded slowly, brick by brick, row by row. Min-jae kept count. At the current pace, the wall would be finished in 2 months. He wasn't sure they had 2 months, but he kept building. Because a wall that's a third of the way built is better than no wall at all. One day, a woman came to the construction site. She was tall. She wore rock crystal glasses, elegant even in the road dust. She stopped at the gate and watched for a long time as people hauled bricks. At the children running between the adults' legs. At the woman directing the unloading of clay. At the boy sitting on an upside-down bucket, writing something in a notebook. Min-jae noticed her. He stood up. He walked over. The woman introduced herself. Yoon So-ra, the eldest daughter of the Yoon merchant house, formerly. Min-jae knew that name. The Yoon family had been a major trading house in Songju until the White Lily House ruined them 2 years ago. Yoon So-ra's father had been poisoned for refusing to join the cartel. Yoon So-ra said she'd come with a proposal. She had heard about the Tonagol pills, that they were cheaper and better than the cartels. She proposed setting up a distribution network. Deliveries to 5 villages, regular, on a schedule, based on demand. She knew the routes, she knew the middlemen. She knew which roads were safe and which weren't. Min-jae listened, silently. So-ra spoke clearly. Numbers, routes, percentages. She could calculate in her head faster than most could on paper. Min-jae appreciated that. When she finished, he agreed. But first he asked one thing. When was the last time she'd slept for 8 hours? So-ra paused. She blinked. No one had ever asked her that. 5 years. For 5 years she'd carried the weight of her 3 younger siblings on her shoulders. She worked day and night. She counted every coin. Not for herself, for them. And in 5 years, not a single person had asked how she was doing. Min-jae could see it in the dark circles under her eyes, in the slight tremor in her fingers, in the way she stood, straight, rigid, like a person who can't afford to bend over because she knows she won't be able to straighten up again. He said he agreed to her proposal, but he had a condition. Before they discussed the details, she would go to Chedin and get a course of adaptogens, a herbal supplement, for recovery. So Ra frowned. She said she didn't need treatment. Min-jae looked up at her. A little boy looks up at a tall woman in glasses, and he said she does need it, because he needs a logistics manager who won't collapse from exhaustion in a month. So-ra opened her mouth, closed it. Then something welled up in her eyes. Not tears, something older and heavier than tears. An admission that someone had seen. She nodded. She went to the workshop. Chedin accepted her in silence. An hour later, she came out and told Min-jae that this woman had chronic nervous exhaustion and early-stage anemia, and that if she had continued at the same pace for another 6 months, she would have collapsed and never gotten up. Min-jae nodded. He knew. So-ra started working 3 days later, and in the very first week, she doubled the workshop's revenue. She found 4 middlemen in the surrounding villages. She negotiated supply agreements. She drew up a schedule. She mapped out the routes. Every evening she came to Minjae with a report. Numbers. Just numbers. How much was sold, how much was left, how much needed to be produced, which recipes were requested most often. Minjae listened and asked questions. They spoke the same language, the language of numbers and planning. For the first time in 5 years, Soda felt that there was someone nearby who understood her not as a workhorse, but as a person capable of thinking. One evening after the report, she didn't leave right away. She lingered by the door. Minjae asked her something else. Soda paused. Then she asked why he had asked about her dreams when they first met. Minjae looked up from his notebook. He replied that it was because of the dark circles under her eyes and the tremor in her fingers. Soda shook her head. She said she understood that. She asked why he needed to know. Why did he care whether she was sleeping? Minjae thought for a moment. He replied that it was because a tired person makes mistakes, and a logistics specialist's mistake costs lives, and because no one should work until they collapse, even if they want to. Soda stood in the doorway and looked at the boy at the table, who was saying things that grown men hadn't said to her in 5 years. Then she quietly, "Thank you." Minjae nodded. He returned to his notebook. So Ra left. Minjae wrote in his notebook, Yoon So-ra, 20 years old, logistician, nervous exhaustion, course of adaptogens, follow up in a month. And next to the health entry, he wrote another line, a reliable person. In the 7th month, they came at night. Minjae woke up to find Soa standing over his mat, silently, a sword in her hand. He sat up. Soa said one word, mercenaries. Minjae stood up, got dressed, went out into the courtyard. The night was dark, moonless. Soa led him to the wall. The wall was 2/3 complete. The southern and western sections were up. The eastern one wasn't. There were only wooden stakes and rope there. Minjae looked into the darkness beyond the wall. Lights, torches, lots of them. He started counting, stopped at 50. Soa stood beside him. She said she estimated about 80, maybe 100. Light mercenaries, without siege equipment, but with crossbows. Minjae asked how many fighters she had. Soa answered, 22 militiamen and herself. Minjae nodded. He asked how many of the 22 wouldn't run away. Soa paused. She answered honestly, 12, maybe 15. The rest would stand their ground, but might falter. Minjae closed his eyes. 13 fighters against 100 mercenaries. The wall isn't finished. Crossbows on the other side. A head-on battle means death. He opened his eyes. He asked Soa if there was time before dawn. Soa said the mercenaries were setting up camp. They wouldn't attack at night. It wasn't worth it. At night, the defender knows the terrain better. They'll strike at dawn. 4 hours. Minjae nodded. He said he needed 4 things. Nambi, Cherin, Sora, and every pot in the neighborhood. Soa looked at him. She didn't ask why. She left. 20 minutes later, all 4 were standing in front of Minjae in the workshop. Nambi, with yellow eyes, sleepy but focused. Cherin, with her hair pinned up and marks from a mortar on her palms. Sora, wearing glasses and holding a notebook. Soa, with a sword. Minjae laid out the plan. He spoke quickly, clearly, without unnecessary words. Nambi, exit through the eastern passage. Go around the camp. Find a stream further upstream. Drop 3 bags of powder into the water. Chui Rin will provide it. The powder is harmless. Magnesium sulfate, a laxative. In high concentrations, it causes severe intestinal upset 2 hours after ingestion. The mercenaries will drink water from the stream at dawn, that's for sure. After a night march, they'll drink Chui Rin. Prepare the powder. 3 bags. She has magnesium sulfate in her supplies. She used it to purify ingredients. That's enough. So Ra, organize the evacuation. Women, children, and the elderly through the eastern passage into the forest. Nambi will show us the path. If the wall falls, the people must already be far away. So A, hold the wall. Do not attack. Defense only. 13 men on the southern section, 3 on the western. Block the eastern passage with carts. The objective is not to win. The objective is to hold out until noon. By noon, the powder will take effect. So-ah listened. She nodded. Then she asked, "What if it doesn't work?" Min-jae looked her in the eyes. He replied that it would work. 200 grams of magnesium sulfate per liter of water takes effect in an hour and a half to 2 hours. For 100 people at once. He had seen it in a reference book on drug side effects, on page 213. So-ah snorted. She left. Nambi vanished into the darkness, literally. Min-jae blinked, and she was gone. Chorin went into the workshop. Sora began waking people up, quietly, from house to house. Min-jae went down to the basement. A coin, the market. He stood in front of the shelves and thought. One purchase. What to buy? A weapon, poison, explosives. All of it was on the shelves. He could have. One grenade, one bomb, one dose of poison in the water, and 100 mercenaries would be gone. He stood and looked. Then he walked past it all. He stopped at the shelf with medical supplies. Field hemostatic bandages. A kit for 100 people. One coin. He took the kit. He went out. Upstairs, he handed the bandages to his father. He said that if there was a battle, there would be wounded. Not just their own, the enemy's too. His father looked at him. He understood. He nodded. Silently, he began setting up a first aid station in the back room. Dawn. Min-jae stood on the wall next to So-ah. The first light. The mercenaries were lining up. Min-jae watched them. He counted. 93. Not 100. Apparently some had stayed behind at camp or gone for provisions. The commander stood at the front. A burly man in chainmail. 2 men with crossbows stood beside him. The commander approached the wall within earshot. He shouted that Tonagol must open the gates and hand over the boy apothecary, that if they did so, the rest would be spared, that they had 1 hour. Min-jae looked at him. He could tell from the commander's face that he wasn't joking, but he saw something else too. Paleness, a light sheen of sweat, weariness in his movements, 8 days of marching, a slight fever. Min-jae counted 3 more with frostbite on their crimson fingers, which they were hiding in their sleeves. An hour passed. The gates didn't open. The commander gave the signal. The mercenaries moved forward. A volley of crossbow bolts. So-ah shouted, "Everyone behind the parapet." The bolts struck the brick. Crumbs rained down. Min-jae pressed himself against the wall. His heart was pounding. His body remembered that he was 7 years old, even if his mind remembered that he was 34. The fear was real, physical, to the point of nausea. So-ah stood there. She didn't hide. She watched. She counted the intervals between volleys. Then she said the crossbows took 8 seconds to reload. In 8 seconds, the militia could get up and throw stones. There were plenty of stones on the wall. Min-jae had made sure of that himself. 3 days ago, he'd asked the children to gather cobblestones by the river. The children thought it was a game. Min-jae didn't bother to explain. The first attack faltered. Stones from above, crossbows from below. The mercenaries retreated. They regrouped. The second attack came half an hour later. Ladders. 3 of them, wooden, rough. So-ah met the first one to climb up. 1 blow, the man fell. Min-jae turned away. He knew it was necessary, but seeing a man fall from the wall, with his shoulder hacked off, is not what a pharmaceutical education prepares you for. The battle lasted until mid-morning. The third attack, the fourth. Mercenaries were climbing up, and the militiamen were knocking them down, and bricks were cracking, and someone was screaming in pain, and it was all terrifying and filthy, and smelled of blood and sweat. Min-jae wasn't standing on the wall. After the first attack, So-ah literally pulled him down and carried him down. He worked in the first aid station, next to his father. 2 wounded, a militiaman with a cut on his arm, a woman who had been hit in the face by a piece of broken brick. Min-jae cleaned the wounds, bandaged them. His hands didn't shake. His hands remembered what to do. By noon, everything had changed. Min-jae could tell by the sounds. The screams grew fewer, then they died down. Then another sound rang out. A strange one. Moans. Lots of moans. So-ah climbed down from the wall. Her face was inscrutable, but there was something like bewilderment in her eyes. She said the mercenaries were retreating, not attacking, not forming ranks, scattering. Many were sitting on the ground. Some were running toward the bushes. Min-jae went out onto the wall. He looked. The mercenary camp mercenaries had turned into a field hospital. People were lying down. sitting hunched over, running toward the trees. 200 grams of magnesium sulfate per liter. Effect in an hour and a half to 2 hours. Page 213. It works. By evening, the mercenaries were gone. Not all of them. 7 remained, too weak to walk. They lay by the extinguished campfires. Soa asked what to do with them.
Min-jae replied, "Treat them."
Soa looked at him. For a long time, he repeated, "Treat them. They're sick. They're not enemies. Right now, they're sick." Father Park went outside the wall with a first aid kit. Min-jae went with him. The 7 mercenaries lay there, watching the little boy as he approached each one, gave them clean water to drink, and placed bread beside them. One of the mercenaries was that very commander, a burly man in chainmail. Now he was lying on his side, feeling nauseous. Min-jae crouched down beside him. He offered water. The commander drank. Then he looked at the boy. He asked why. Min-jae replied that it was because he was sick. The commander said that 3 hours ago he had ordered him to be killed. Min-jae nodded. He said he knew. But right now the commander needed water, not a conversation about the past. By morning, all 7 had left. Silently, without threats, without saying goodbye. Min-jae stood on the wall and watched them go. Soa stood beside him, silently. Then she said that he was either the smartest person she had ever met or the most reckless. Min-jae replied that it was one and the same. After the mercenaries' attack, Tonagal had changed. Not the walls, nor the gates. The people. Min-jae could see it in their eyes. Before, the neighborhood residents looked around like people waiting for the next blow. Now they looked like people who had already survived one blow. These were different looks. The first was full of fear. The second was full of something else. Not bravery. Habit. The habit of knowing they could endure. The wall was completed in 3 weeks. Entirely. 2 meters high. Burnt bricks. 2 gates. So A inspected every section personally. She tapped the bricks. She tried to wiggle them loose. She frowned. Then she nodded. The population grew. People came. Every week. 3, 5, 10 at a time. From the surrounding villages, from neighboring provinces. Word was spreading. There's a place where children don't die, where they treat you for free, where the wall stands. By the end of the 7th month, 400 people. By the end of the 8th, 500. Min-jae counted and realized that the growth was dangerous. More people meant more food, more water, more pills, more of everything. And the coin market still allowed only 1 purchase per day. 1 coin, 1 item. He couldn't scale the market, so he had to scale everything else. So Ra brought a solution. One morning, she walked into the workshop with a notebook and laid out the numbers in front of Min-jae and Cherin. The trade network covered 5 villages. Income was stable, but the limit had been reached. 5 villages meant 5 middlemen and 500 customers. The current model couldn't be scaled any further. A trade route was needed. Their own. Direct. From Tongol to the Songju market. With regular caravans. With security. Min-jae listened. Sora continued. The trade route costs money. Security costs money. But profits will quadruple. Because right now the middlemen are taking 60% of the markup for themselves. If we sell directly, that 60% stays with Ton. Min-jae nodded. He asked how much was needed to get started. Sora named a figure. 300 coins. They had 120. Cherin said that if they doubled production, they'd have enough in 2 months. Min-jae asked if they could double production. Cherin replied that they could if she had 3 apprentices and a second kiln. Min-jae looked at Soa. Soa shrugged. She said that 3 girls from the militia had asked to be transferred to something other than sticks. They aren't fighters. They won't be non-fighters. Min-jae nodded. A week later, Cherin had 3 apprentices. 2 weeks later, a second furnace. A month later, production had doubled. The Tongol pills were being sent in 10 different directions. Each was signed with a name. Each was 4 times cheaper than the cartels. Each worked. Min-jae thought about Hwang Gi-sok. After the mercenaries' attack failed, he had been silent. 2 months of silence. Nambi went on reconnaissance 3 times a week. She reported back. The provincial branch of the White Lily House had lost 12% of its sales over the last quarter. Hwang Gi-sok had summoned an auditor from the capital. The auditor came and went, and after his visit, Hwang Gi-sok looked paler than usual. Nambi didn't know the details, but Min-jae could guess. 12% in a quarter is a disaster for the cartel. The cartel relies on its margin. The margin relies on its monopoly. The monopoly relies on there being no alternative. And now, there is an alternative. A small neighborhood with a young pharmacist who sells pills at cost plus 10% and who labels each pill with the patient's name. People are reluctant to buy from the cartel, not because it's more expensive, because the difference is obvious. The cartel sells a product, Tone sells care. One day, a stranger came to see Min Jae, not young, well-dressed, with a weary face. He sat down across from him, silently. Min Jae poured him some tea. The man took the cup with both hands. He held it. He didn't drink. Then he said his name was An Chol-soo, that he was a former alchemist at the House of the White Lily, that he had worked there for 20 years, that he had formulated recipes for the cartel, and that the recipes he formulated had been deliberately weakened. Min Jae remained silent. An Chol-soo continued. He spoke quietly, like a man who had been silent for a long time and had finally made up his mind. The cartel isn't interested in healthy people. Healthy people don't buy pills. The formulas are designed to provide relief but not a cure, so that people come back, again and again. 12 coins for a week of relief, 52 weeks a year, 624 coins from a single patient. Multiply that by 10,000 patients in the province. Min Jae listened and did the math. 6 million coins a year from a single province for deliberately weakened pills. An Chol-soo fell silent. He looked into his cup. Then he said he'd left the cartel 6 months ago, that he was ashamed, that he'd known and kept quiet for 20 years, that he wanted to help. Min Jae looked at him for a long time. He could tell by his eyes that the man was telling the truth. He could tell by his hands that the man drank. He could tell by the color of his sclera that his liver was damaged. 20 years of shame and alcohol. Min Jae asked what he knew how to do. An Chol-soo replied that he knew all the cartel's recipes. All of them. All 200. Including the classified ones. Including the recipe for the imperial family's pills. Min Jae nodded. He poured more tea. He said he needed the recipes. But first, he needed An Chol-soo himself, alive and well, and that Cho Rin would prepare a liver regeneration regimen for him. An Chol-soo set down his cup. His hands were shaking. He asked why the boy was helping him. He had been poisoning people with weakened pills for 20 years. Min Jae replied that he knew, but that the man who had come forward to confess was not the same man who had remained silent for 20 years. He was a different man, and this different man needed help. An Chol-soo closed his eyes. He sat like that for a minute, then he opened them. He said he would start with bronchitis remedies, because winter was coming, and because hundreds of children in the provinces die of bronchitis every winter, and the cartel's bronchitis pill is only 30% effective. He knows because he himself lowered the concentration on Hwang Gi-sok's orders. Min Jae nodded. He called for Che Rin. He introduced them to each other. Che Rin looked at the cartel's former alchemist. An Chol-soo looked at the young alchemist from the Che clan. Min Jae said they needed to talk. He left. They talked until morning. Min Jae didn't know what they talked about, but in the morning, Che Rin came out of the workshop with the look of someone who had been shown a treasure map. And An Chol-soo came out with the look of someone who had had a weight lifted from his shoulders. Min Jae stood in the courtyard. He drank tea. He watched the sunrise. Tongigol, 500 people, the wall, the workshop, the retail network, the militia, the school that Sora had opened a month ago for the children, 12 students, Miyeon among them. The girl who had been dying by the well a year ago was now learning the alphabet. Min Jae finished his tea. He washed the cup. He set it out to dry. Winter was coming. Tonegol's first real winter as a city, not as a dying neighborhood. He was ready, almost. Winter came early. The first snow fell on the walls of Tonegol at the beginning of the 10th month. Min Jae stood on the wall and watched as a white blanket covered the world. Beautiful, deadly. Winter in Hwagyong killed silently, not with a sword, with cold, with hunger, with a cough that started in the morning and took his breath away by nightfall. Min Jae had been preparing for this winter for 3 months. 4 months worth of grain, 6 months worth of dried soybeans, 200 doses of cough medicine, 100 doses of fever reducers, 50 doses of anti-parasitic medication, firewood, coal, warm clothing. Sora drew up a distribution chart. Each family received a ration based on the number of members. Every child received a pill in the morning. Every elderly person received an extra portion of coal. The system worked. for the first week. In the second week, people came to the gates. Not 5, not 10, 80. Women, children, elderly people. From the village of Kyumho, 2 days' journey to the north, the Black Iron Clan had burned the village, a tax on breath. They took all the children with the beginnings of chi. The rest were driven out into the cold. They walked for 2 days, without food, without warm clothes. 3 children died on the way. Min-jae stood at the gate and watched them. 80 people, standing silently in the snow, with faces that no longer pleaded because they were used to no one answering. So Ra stood beside him. Silently, she took out a notebook. She opened the page with the supplies. She looked at Min-jae. She didn't need to say it out loud. Supplies for 500 people for 4 months. Plus 80 makes 580. The supplies would last 3 months and 1 week. Winter lasts 5 months, a shortfall of 1.5 months. Min-jae was silent. He looked at the people outside the gate, at the child whose mother was holding close to her chest under a tattered blanket, at the old man who stood leaning on a cane, staring unblinkingly into the void, at the 6-year-old girl holding the hand of a 4-year-old boy, both silent with silence that comes over children who have stopped crying. Min-jae turned to Soe. He told her to open the gate. Soe closed her notebook. She didn't argue. The gate opened. 80 people entered Tonagol. Min-jae worked for 3 days straight with almost no sleep. He examined everyone. He made diagnoses. He assigned them to different houses. 6 were in serious condition: frostbite, pneumonia, exhaustion. He spent 3 coins over 3 days. Antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, warming ointment. 3 of the 6 pulled through. 2 stabilized. 1 died. A 4-year-old boy, the very one his sister was holding by the hand. The pneumonia had gone too far. His lungs were filled with fluid. Min-jae did everything he knew from 2 lifetimes. It wasn't enough. He sat next to the boy's body and said nothing. Father Park stood behind him. He placed a hand on his shoulder, the heavy hand of a doctor who knew that feeling. Min-jae didn't cry. He sat there, looking at the little face, and thought that in his past life, during his pediatrics rotation, he had seen this, and that he hadn't been able to help then either, and that knowledge does not equal salvation, and that this is the most terrifying truth a doctor can learn. That evening, he went down to the basement. He stood in front of the shelves. 1 purchase, 1 coin. He could buy anything, but he couldn't buy time. He couldn't buy yesterday when the boy was still breathing. He bought winter wheat seeds, cold-resistant, fast-growing, because you can't bring the dead back, but the living need to be fed. The supply problem demanded a solution. Min-jae convened a council, officially, for the first time, with A. Cho-rin, with Ra Nam-bi, Father Park, An Cho-su, 6 people at the table. Min-jae laid out the situation. 3 months' worth of supplies, 5 months of winter, trade drops in winter, roads get snowed in, caravans don't run. We need an alternative source of income, or an alternative source of food. So Ra suggested selling part of the pill stockpile in Songju at winter prices. In winter, medicine prices double. Chae-rin suggested developing a new pill, a warming one, for which demand would be highest in winter. An Cho-su suggested using the cartel's recipes. Among the classified ones is a recipe for a winter elixir. The military and travelers buy it. The markup is huge. Min-jae listened. Then he said that all 3 options were good and that they would implement all 3 at the same time. Chae-rin and An Cho-su are working on the winter elixir and the warming pill. So Ra is preparing a winter caravan to Songju. So Ah is providing security. Nam-bi is scouting the roads. Father Park is running the first aid station and monitoring the neighborhood's health. Min-jae is coordinating. The winter elixir was ready in 10 days. Chae-rin and An Cho-su worked together, and it was like fire and water that, by some miracle, didn't extinguish each other but created steam. She was quick and intuitive. He was slow and precise. She suggested. He checked. She burned with passion. He cooled things down. Min-jae watched and thought that if all the alchemists in the world worked like this, the pills would cost a copper coin instead of a gold one. The first caravan set out for Songju at the beginning of the 11th month. So A led the way. 8 militia fighters, a cart with goods, winter elixir, warming pills, regular morning pills, sprouted grain, They returned 4 days later. The cart was empty. A sack of coins, 420. So Ra counted them 3 times. Min-jae nodded. Enough. For food for the 2 remaining months of winter, for purchasing raw materials, for repairing the houses that had sagged under the snow. Winter continued. Min-jae worked every day, morning, rounding the neighborhood, every house, every child, every elderly person. Day, workshop, recipes, quality control. Evening, council, planning, reports. Night, the basement. 1 coin, 1 purchase. He was now buying things he hadn't thought about before. A construction manual, 1 coin. A reference book on irrigation, 1 coin. A book on the basics of animal husbandry, 1 coin. Tonagol was growing, not outward, inward, deeper, stronger. By midwinter, Min-jae walked the streets and saw things that hadn't been there a year ago. Smoke from chimneys, lights in the windows, laughter beyond the walls, children building a snowman by the well, Soa standing on the wall, gazing at the horizon. Choedin arguing with Anchosu so loudly it could be heard 2 streets away. Nambi sitting on the roof, dangling her feet. Danbi, who was sleeping on her lap. Sora, who was counting coins and smiling for the first time in 6 months. A father who was brewing tea and humming a song Min-jae didn't know. It was a lively place. A year ago, people were dying here. Now they lived here. Min-jae stood in the middle of the street. Snow fell on his hair. He was 8 years old in this world, 35 in the other, and for the first time in both lives, he felt that he was standing where he belonged. Spring of the 2nd year. The snow had melted, the mud had dried, and a man in a white hanbok with the imperial seal on his belt arrived at the gates of Tonagol. Min-jae saw him from the wall, a single man, no guards, no weapons, just a scroll in his hand and the seal. Soa tensed up. Min-jae ordered the gate to be opened. The man entered. He introduced himself, an envoy from the court of His Majesty Emperor Jeong Do Hwan. His voice was steady. His face was inscrutable. He requested an audience with the apothecary Park. Min-jae received him in the workshop. He poured tea. The envoy did not drink. He unrolled the scroll. He began to read. Empress Dowager Huang is ill. The court alchemists are powerless. The fever has not subsided for 3 months. The capital's physicians have tried everything. The emperor has heard of the boy apothecary from Tonagol. The emperor asks for help. He is not ordering, he is asking. Min-jae listened. The envoy fell silent. He folded the scroll. He looked up. He waited for an answer. Min-jae asked about the symptoms. The messenger took out a second scroll, a detailed one. Fever, sweating, joint pain, weight loss, enlarged liver, skin rashes in the morning that disappear by evening. Min-jae read, and his expression did not change, but inside he was already piecing together the picture. 3 months of fever, enlarged liver, rash in the morning, disappears in the evening, weight loss despite a healthy appetite. He closed the scroll. He said he would go, but on his own terms. He would bring his own team, Chui Rin. So A, Nam B. He needed access to all the court physicians' records. He needed a laboratory. And he needed no one standing over his shoulder while he worked. The envoy nodded to everything. Min-jae turned to Sora. He said he was leaving Tonagol in her care. Sora nodded. Then she told him to come back. Min-jae replied that he would. Father Park stood by the door. He was silent. Then he walked over and hugged his son. For the first time in a year, Min-jae hugged him back. Small hands, broad back. The journey to the capital took 8 days. Min-jae rode in a cart. Soa rode on horseback beside him. Choedin was in the cart opposite. Nambi ran through the trees, literally. She moved through the branches faster than the wagon moved along the road. The capital, Hwagyong, Hansong. Min-jae saw it from the hill. Huge. Walls 4 men high, black-tiled roofs, towers, bridges. The palace on the mountain like a crown of stone and wood. Beautiful, monstrously beautiful. Because behind these walls, the gates were closed to refugees. Because behind these bridges, people died of the same diseases as in Tonagol, but paid 10 times more for pills. In the palace, Min-jae was led to the chambers of the Empress Dowager. He entered. The woman lay on silk pillows, thin, yellow, eyes closed. 3 court physicians stood nearby, old, in expensive clothes. They looked at the boy as if he were a cockroach that had crawled onto the imperial table. Min-jae paid no attention. He approached the bed. He took the Empress's hand. Pulse. Rapid. Irregular. He looked at the whites of her eyes. Jaundiced. He palpated her abdomen. Enlarged liver. Enlarged spleen. He examined the skin on her forearms. A fine rash. Pink. He closed his eyes and thought. 3 months. Fever. Liver. Spleen. A rash appearing in the morning and disappearing by evening. Weight loss. Joints. He opened his eyes, turned to the physicians, asked what they had been treating her with. The senior physician listed them. White Lily House fever-reducing pills, fortifying elixirs, blood-purifying decoction, chi-restoring meditation under the guidance of a third-rank master. Min-jae listened. Then he asked if they had tested the water the Empress drinks. The physicians exchanged glances. What water? The Empress drinks the purest mountain water from a private spring. Min-jae for a sample. They brought it to him. He sniffed it, tasted it on the tip of his tongue, spit it out. Then he asked Choi Rin to bring a testing kit from his bag. A small one, bought at the coin market 2 months ago. Test strips for detecting heavy metals. He dipped the strip into the water. A minute later, the strip turned color. Min-jae looked at it. Then he looked at the doctors. He said that the water contained lead salts, that it wasn't illness that was killing the Empress Dowager. She was being poisoned, slowly, through the water. 3 months, drop by drop. The doctors turned pale. Min-jae didn't wait for their reaction. He turned to Soa. He said he needed access to the source. He needed to find where the water was poisoned, and by whom. Soa nodded. She left. Min-jae sat down next to the Empress. He began to work. Chelation, binding heavy metals and removing them from the body. In his world, they used EDTA and succinyl for this. Here, he needed an equivalent. He would have gone down to the basement, but there is no basement here. The market only opens in Tonagol, just its door, so he has to work with what he has. Cho Rin. He explained the principle to her. He needs a substance that binds to the metal in the blood and is excreted through the kidneys. Choi Rin thought for an hour. Then she said she knew of a herb, korcho, a mountain herb, rare. It grows on slopes above the cloud line. It's used in alchemy to purify metals of impurities. If it purifies metal on the outside, it should bind the metal on the inside. Min-jae looked at her. He said she was a genius. Chedin blushed. She said she wasn't a genius, but an alchemist of the Che clan, and that he shouldn't say such things in front of people. There were no people around. Nambi found the korcho in 2 days. She brought a small bag. Chedin prepared the extract. Min-jae calculated the dosage. They began the treatment. After a week, the Empress's fever subsided. After 2 weeks, she opened her eyes. After 3 weeks, she sat up in bed and asked for soup. The court physician stood in the corner and remained silent. The young Emperor Lee Do Hwan came in person. Min-jae saw the Emperor for the first time. Young, 22 years old, tired eyes on a young face. He looked at his mother, who was sitting up in bed eating soup, then at the boy standing nearby with a notebook in his hands. He bowed to the boy. The Emperor bowed to an 8-year-old child. The entire court saw it. Min-jae bowed in return, deeper, because it wasn't the Emperor standing before him. Before him stood a son who had nearly lost his mother. Later, they spoke. Just the two of them. Lee Do Hwan asked questions. Min-jae answered. About Tongor, about the pills, about the cartel, about the children who die because the pills are deliberately weakened, about the wall being built by former refugees, about a girl named Yunsu who was dying by the well a year ago and is now learning the alphabet. The Emperor listened. He was silent. Then he said one thing, that the capital's gates are closed to refugees not by his order, by order of the Regency Council, which controls the House of the White Lily, that the Emperor is not free in his own capital. Min-jae nodded, said he knew, because the man who poisoned his mother was most likely sitting on that council. Lee Do Hwan turned pale. Min-jae said he would find out who. He was already working with Soe. Min-jae returned to Tonggol a month later. Princess Lee Yuna came with him, the Emperor's younger sister, 17 years old, fragile, quiet, with a habit of tucking her hands into her sleeves. Officially, she had come for treatment. Unofficially, she was a hostage, a guarantee that the Emperor wouldn't change his mind about supporting Tun. The Regency Council had insisted. Min-jae knew, Yuna knew, everyone knew. Min-jae met her at the doorstep. He didn't bow. He said she would have her own room here, her own key, and the right to leave at any time, that it was in writing. He took out a piece of paper, signed, with Tone's seal. Yuna took the paper. She read it for a long time. She reread it. Then she looked up. Her eyes were wet. Min-jae asked if she needed anything right now. She replied that she didn't. Then she paused and said that for the first time in her life, she had been given a key. Min-jae nodded. He left. He let her be alone. Tonagol greeted him with news. So Ra had reported in. During Min-jae's month-long absence, the city hadn't collapsed. On the contrary, the graduates of So-A's school had formed the first permanent unit. 20 fighters, women. So-A had trained them for 6 months, and now they held the line better than the male militia. They were nicknamed the Guard of Beauties. So-A didn't comment on the name. Chae-rin had expanded the workshop. 3 rooms, 8 students. An Chol-soo taught a course in alchemy for the older students. Pill production had tripled. The trade route was operational. 2 caravans a week. So Ra kept the books with a precision that would make the capital's accountants bleed from the nose. Population, 800 people. A year ago, there were 212. Min-jae looked at the numbers and thought, 800. This was no longer a neighborhood. It was a town. A small one, but a town. With a school, with a workshop, with medicinal farms where herbs, soybeans, and wheat grew, with a wall, with a guard, with a pharmacy where people from 3 provinces came. But Min-jae knew this was only the beginning. Because Hwang Gi-sok hadn't left, he had regrouped. Nambi reported. After the mercenaries' failure and after Min-jae had cured the Empress, Hwang Gi-sok realized that the boy from Tonagol couldn't be broken by force. He changed tactics. He went higher up, to the Black Iron clan. He proposed an alliance. Tonggol was growing strong. Too strong for a single cartel, but not for a clan with an army. Min-jae listened to Nambi's report and remained silent. The Black Iron clan, the very ones who burn villages and take children, the very ones Nambi and Danbi had fled from. Nambi spoke calmly, but her tail was wrapped around her leg in a tight knot, a sign of fear she didn't show on her face. Min-jae said he needed time to think. He thought for 3 days. Then he convened a council, an expanded one, with A Cho-rin, with Ra, Nambi, Father Park, An Chol-soo, Kim Hae-jin, who had arrived 2 months ago from a neighboring village and had become the chief physician of the field hospital, and Princess Lee Yuna. Yuna sat in the corner, quiet, hands in her sleeves, but she was listening. Min-jae explained the situation. Hwang Gi-sok is forming an alliance with the Black Iron clan. The clan will send an army, not mercenaries, a real army, masters of the blade, fighters with chi. The wall won't hold, the Guard of Beauties won't hold, So-A won't hold out. We need another way. Silence. Then Yuna spoke up, for the first time at the council, in a quiet voice. She said that the Black Iron clan isn't monolithic, that there are factions within the clan, that the northern branch wants war, while the southern branch wants trade, that the head of the southern branch, General Ko Myung-ho, is ill. He has diabetes. The clan's court physicians can't handle it. If someone cures General Ko, the southern branch won't support the war. Without the southern branch, the northern branch won't attack. They won't have enough strength. Everyone looked at Yuna. She blushed. She tucked her hands deeper into her sleeves. Min-jae asked how she knew. Yuna replied that she had read, a lot, her whole life, in the palace library, because she had nothing else to do. Min-jae nodded. He looked at Cho-rin. He asked if they could make a pill for diabetes. Cho-rin frowned. She said that diabetes is a disruption of chi metabolism. It cannot be cured with pills, only controlled. Min-jae smiled. He said that was exactly right. Control, not a cure. Lifelong control. A lifelong customer, a lifelong ally. Cho-rin understood. Her eyes widened. Then she smiled too. That smile that appears when an alchemist sees the perfect formula. 2 weeks later, Min-jae sent a package to General Ko Myung-ho, no return address, through an intermediary. Pills to control blood sugar levels, a month's supply, with instructions, and a note. If it helps, send the empty box back. A month later, the empty box returned, with a note. I need more, and an invitation to meet. The 3rd year, Tonagol became the city of Tona, 5,000 residents, 3 workshops, a trade route, a school for 40 students, a 20-bed hospital, healing farms on 3 terraces behind the eastern wall, a guard of beauties numbering 120 fighters, a wall of fired brick 2.5 meters high, 2 gates, a bell on the tower that So-A ordered hung after the first attack by mercenaries. Min-jae was 10 years old on the outside and 37 on the inside. He sat in the office that So-Ra had set up for him in a former warehouse, a desk, a chair, 12 shelves. 3 notebooks had long since turned into 12. Prescriptions, accounting, census, trade routes, diplomatic correspondence, military records, agriculture, construction, education, medicine, supplies, and the last one, untitled, personal. In it, Min-jae wrote down names, every child he had cured, every person who came to Tona and stayed, everyone who died and whom he had failed to save. 312 names on the first list, 4,988 on the second, 11 on the third. 11 names, 11 failures. He remembered every face. Sometimes at night they came to him, not as nightmares, as reminders. A 4-year-old boy with pneumonia, whom he hadn't saved that first winter. An old man from the village of Gyeongho, who made it to the gate and died on the threshold from exhaustion. The half-blood girl Nam-bi, found in the forest too late. 11 names. Min-jae didn't cross them out. He didn't hide the notebook. He placed it on the shelf next to the others, because to forget is to betray, and to remember is to work so there won't be a 12th name. General Ko Myung-ho became an ally, not a friend. An ally. The difference matters. A friend comes because they want to. An ally comes because it's in their interest. Diabetes pills bound the general to Tone more tightly than any treaty. Every month, a courier from Tone brought him a box. Every month, the general sent back a report on the movements of the clan's northern branch. So Ra called it a barter, Min-jae called it treatment, because a healthy general makes better decisions than a sick one, and General Ko's decisions affected thousands of lives. The southern branch of the Black Iron clan refused to support the war against Tone, officially because of disagreements over strategy, unofficially because General Ko took a small green pill every morning with Ko Myung-ho written on the wrapper, and for the first time in 10 years, he could walk a mile without gasping for breath. The northern branch didn't dare go it alone. Hwang Gi-sok found himself between a rock and a hard place. The cartel was pressing from above. It demanded results. Tonai was pressing from below. The cartel's sales had fallen by 30% in 2 years. 30%. Min-jae knew that figure. So Ra knew it. The entire Songju market knew it. The province was shifting to Tonai, village by village. Not by force, not by threats. People simply made a choice. A pill with a name for 3 coins, or a pill without a name for 12. A pill that heals, or a pill that creates addiction. People were ashamed to buy from the cartel. Old man Jung once said this out loud at the market, that he was ashamed he'd paid for a lie for 30 years. His words spread through the 3 villages in a week. Min-jae was not pleased. He knew that a cornered beast is more dangerous than a free one, and he was right. One evening, Nam-bi brought 2 pieces of news. The first, Hwang Gi-sok is sick. His youngest daughter, Sun-mi, a fever. The same girl who had killed children in Tonagol 3 years ago. The cartel's court physicians were treating her. It wasn't helping, because they were treating her with cartel pills, the very same ones that An Chol-su had weakened on Hwang's own orders 20 years ago. An irony that cut like a knife. Second piece of news. The cartel had already appointed a replacement for Hwan. A man was on his way from the capital. Baek Sung-jo, 40 years old, a former soldier. He joined the cartel after being wounded on the northern border. Not a merchant, a soldier. With a mandate from the head of the White Lily House, and with orders to resolve the Tone issue at any cost. Min-jae sat and thought. 2 matters, 2 decisions. One urgent, one important. The urgent one first. He stood up. He went to the workshop. It was late. Che-rin was still working. She always worked late. Min-jae sat down at the table next to her. He said he needed a pill. A children's pill. A fever reducer with antibacterial properties. For an 8-year-old girl. Weight approximately 25 kilograms. Moderate chronic malnutrition. Choi-rin didn't ask who it was for. She knew Min-jae well enough to understand that the question was pointless. If he was making a pill, it meant someone was sick. That was enough. They worked until midnight. The pill turned out well. Min-jae signed the wrapper. Hwang Sun-mi, 8 years old, fever, morning and evening, 10 days. Choi-rin read the name. She froze. She looked at Min-jae. Her eyes hardened. She said it was the daughter of the man who had sent mercenaries to kill them. Min-jae nodded. He said he knew. Choi-rin asked why. Min-jae replied that it was because the girl wasn't to blame for what her father had done, and because the pill was labeled with her name, not her father's. Choi-rin was silent. Then she said quietly that she hated it when he was right. Ming-jae smiled. He wrapped the pill, put it in a box, sent it through an intermediary. No signature, no note, just the pill with her name on it. A week later, Nambi reported back. The girl was recovering. Her fever broke on the 3rd day. By the 5th, she was getting out of bed. By the 7th, she was eating on her own. Hwang Gi-sok found out who the pill was from. Nambi didn't know how. Maybe from the handwriting on the wrapper. Maybe from the formula that no alchemist in the province could replicate. Maybe he just figured it out. Because in a world where everyone sells, there was only one person who gave. Hwang Gi-sok sat in his office for 3 days and didn't come out. On the 4th day, he wrote a letter of resignation. Quietly, without explanation, without a scandal. He gathered his 3 daughters. He loaded their belongings onto a cart. He left the province. Before leaving, he left a box on the threshold of the provincial branch of the White Lily House. Inside the box lay an empty pill wrapper with the name Hwang Sun-mi on it, and on top of the wrapper was the branch director's seal, broken in half. Nambi brought the wrapper to Min-jae. He unfolded it, looked at it, ran his finger over the name. Then he carefully placed the wrapper in an untitled notebook, between the pages, not on the list of the saved, not on the list of the lost, in between. Because Hwang Gi-sok was neither one nor the other. He was a man who did bad things for 20 years and did the right thing once. And the right thing was heavier than all the bad things put together. Now for the 2nd case. Baek Sung-jo. Yuna told him about him in detail. She received letters from the palace through channels known only to her. Pigeon, a code she and her brother devised in childhood. Baek Sung-jo, 40 years old, a native of the northern province, a military career. Rose to the rank of commander of 1,000, wounded while suppressing a peasant uprising, discharged from the army, joined the House of the White Lily, not out of conviction, out of necessity. His wife had died. His son was ill. His son had an illness that local doctors called qi poisoning. Min-jae read the description of the symptoms. He read it again. Leukemia, or something very similar. Min-jae set the letter aside. He sat there for a long time. Then he called a meeting, an expanded one. So-ae, Cho-rin, So-ra, Nam-bi, Father Park, An Chol-su, Hae-jin, Yuna. He explained the situation. Baek Sung-jo is coming with a mandate to destroy Tone. He will have the support of the northern branch of the Black Iron clan. He is not a merchant. He is a soldier. You can't negotiate with him. But he has a sick son. Silence. Soa spoke first. She said it was a trap, that if they offered treatment in exchange for peace, it would be blackmail. And blackmail is a weapon that cuts both ways. Min-jae shook his head. He said it wasn't blackmail. Treatment, no strings attached, because the boy is sick. Soa frowned. Cho-rin said she didn't know how to treat leukemia with pills. Min-jae replied that he knew, but the coin market could. 1 purchase a day. The right choice was needed. He began to count. Leukemia treatment protocol. In his world, that's chemotherapy. It's impossible here, but the principle is the same. Kill the diseased cells. Let the healthy ones grow. He went down to the basement that evening. The coin. The market. He walked a long way, past familiar shelves, past rows he'd memorized over 3 years. He reached a section he'd never visited before. Oncology. Here were drugs he feared, because they were powerful, because the line between treatment and poisoning was measured in milligrams, because a mistake meant death. He stood and read the price tags. Then he chose. A pediatric immunomodulatory complex for blood disorders. Gentle, long-acting, 1 coin. He took it. He returned. Baek Sung-jo arrived in the province 10 days later, with a detachment of 500 fighters, not mercenaries, regular soldiers of the House of the White Lily, a significant difference. Mercenaries fight for money and leave when it's no longer profitable. Soldiers fight on orders and do not leave until the order is rescinded. Baek set up camp 2 days' march from Tone. He did not attack. He waited. Min-jae waited too. 3 days later he sent a package, through Nam-bi. The girl slipped through the camp unnoticed. She left the box in the commander's tent. Inside the box was a device, with instructions, with the dosage scheduled by day, and with a note, for your son, no strings attached. Min-jae. Nam-bi returned. She reported that Baek had found the box an hour later. He read the note twice. Then he sat and stared at the box until morning. Min-jae waited. A day. 2. A week. The camp didn't move. Baek didn't attack. But he didn't leave either. 2 weeks later, a messenger arrived from Baek, alone, unarmed, with a letter. Baek Sung-jo requested a meeting, in person, one-on-one. Min-jae agreed. Soa said she wouldn't let him go alone. Min-jae looked at her. He said he would go alone. Soa clenched her teeth. Minjae added that she could stay within sight, with a bow. Soa nodded. It was a compromise. They met in a neutral clearing between the camp and Tone. Minjae arrived with a tray, a teapot, 2 bowls. Baek Sungjo stood watching the boy with the tray, a large man with a scar running across his entire left cheek, a military bearing, harsh eyes. Minjae set the tray down on a rock. He poured the tea. He held out a bowl. Baek didn't take it. He asked why. Minjae asked what he meant by what. Baek said, "Why the medicine?" "For my son." No strings attached. No one does that. Minjae replied that he does. Baek asked what he wanted. Minjae replied that he wanted Baek to drink the tea while it was still hot. Baek stood there. Then he sat down. He took the bowl. He took a sip. They were silent. Minjae waited. Baek spoke. Quietly. The way people who aren't used to speaking quietly do. His son is 12 years old. He's been sick since he was 7. His wife died 5 years ago. From the same illness. The doctor said it was hereditary, that the child was dying, that he shouldn't get attached. Minjae listened. His face didn't change, but inside something tightened. Don't get attached. The same words. Always the same words. Baek said he joined the cartel because the cartel promised medicine for his son, in exchange for his service. For 5 years he followed orders. He crushed those who stood in the way of the monopoly. He burned down workshops. He shut down pharmacies, all for a box of pills they sent him every month, and which didn't work. He knew it didn't work. He saw his son turning pale, coughing up blood, his bones showing through his skin, but he kept going, because as long as there's a pill, there's hope, even if it's false. Minjae was silent. Then he asked his son's name. Baek answered. Baek Junho, 12 years old. Minjae pulled a piece of paper from his bosom, a brush. He wrote, Baek Junho, 12 years old, blood, morning and evening, 30 days, check up in 2 weeks. He handed the paper to Baek. Baek read. His hands that had held a sword for 30 years, they were trembling. Minjae said the treatment would take a long time, that the results would be in a month, that he needed to see the boy every 2 weeks, that he would come himself if Baek brought his son to Tong. Baek looked up. His eyes were wet. He asked, still without conditions. Minjae answered, without conditions. Baek lowered his head. A minute, 2, then he stood up. He said the army wouldn't leave. The cartel's order was in effect. He was a soldier. He followed orders. But he would bring his son tomorrow. Minjae nodded. Baek left. Soa came down from the hill, a bow slung over her shoulder. She asked what was going on. Minjae said a boy would be coming to stay with them tomorrow, 12 years old, and that he needed to be fed flatbread with honey. Soa looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. Baek Junho arrived the next day, thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes and sunken cheeks. 12 years old, but he looked 9. Minjae met him at the gate. He looked him over. Pale gums, bruises on his forearms with no visible injuries, enlarged lymph nodes on his neck, small hemorrhages on his skin. The picture matched. Minjae crouched down in front of the boy. He asked his name. The boy answered quietly, Junho. Minjae asked if he liked sweets. The boy nodded. Minjae said there were honey cakes here, and that Junsok, who was already 8, would show him where the best ones were. Junho looked at his father. Baek stood behind him, like a rock, with the face of a man who had brought his son to the enemy and was praying he wouldn't regret it. Minjae stood up. He looked at Baek. He said the boy would stay for 2 weeks, that Kim Hae-jin would look after him, that Baek could come whenever he wanted, that the gates were open to him. Baek nodded. He looked at his son. He placed a hand on his head. He stood there for a moment. Then he turned and walked away, without looking back. A military habit, not to look back, because if you look back, you won't be able to leave. Hae-jin took the boy in, round-faced, rosy-cheeked, with warm hands. She was the best healer for such cases, not because she knew more than Minjae, but because her hands were warm, and her voice was soft, and she smelled of herbs and honey. Children trusted her in a minute. Junho didn't. A soldier's son, accustomed not to trust. But 3 days later, Hae-jin caught him surreptitiously sniffing the little bag of dried herbs she'd left on the table. She didn't say anything. She just gave him a bag just like it. A personal one, with his name on it. Junho hid the bag under his pillow, and from then on, he slept more soundly. The treatment was working. Min-jae went down to the basement every day, 1 coin every day, 1 purchase. He established a regimen, first week, an immunomodulator, second week, a drug to support blood production, third week, a special vitamin complex. Every day he chose what Junho needed on that specific day, not abstract treatment, something specific. For a 12-year-old boy who likes to sniff dry grass, and who, for the first time in 5 years, laughs when Jun-sok shows him how to whistle through a soybean pod. 2 weeks later, Baek arrived. Alone, without security. He saw his son in the yard. Junho was running, not fast, slowly, but he was running, after Jun-sok, who was running away with his flatbread. Baek stopped at the gate. He stood there, watching. His face, the face of a soldier, a man who shows no emotion. It cracked, like a brick under a hammer. He stood there, unable to take a step. Soa approached him, silently. She stood beside him. She knew that state, when you see something you didn't expect and can't believe, and you're afraid to blink because it might suddenly disappear. Baek stood there for 10 minutes. Then he took a step. Junho saw his father. He ran, not fast, but he ran. Baek dropped to one knee. He hugged his son. Min-jae watched from the workshop window. Chae-rin stood nearby. She was watching too, silently. Then she quietly said she hated it when he was right. The second time in a month. Min-jae didn't smile, because the boy was still sick, and there were still months of treatment ahead. And every day, 1 coin, 1 purchase, and there was no room for error. Baek left that evening. Before leaving, he approached Min-jae. He stood there. He was silent. Then he said the cartel's order was in effect, that he had to destroy Tone, that he was a soldier. Min-jae nodded. Baek continued. He said there were orders to follow and orders not to follow, and that he'd never known the difference his whole life, but now he knew. Min-jae was silent. Baek said the army would stay, but it wouldn't move, neither forward nor backward. It would stand its ground, until the cartel sent a replacement, or until it rescinded the order. That was all he could do. Min-jae replied that it was enough. Baek left. The army stood its ground for 2 months, without moving. The cartel sent a messenger. Baek sent the messenger back. The cartel sent a second one. Baek sent the second one back. The third time, an inspector arrived from the capital, with a document ordering his removal. Baek read the document. He took off his cartel officer's insignia. He placed it on the inspector's desk. He took his son from Tona and left. Not for the capital, south, to General Ko. The army stood idle without a commander for another week. Then it disbanded. Soldiers aren't mercenaries, but soldiers without a commander are just people in uniform. Tona held out, again, without a fight, without bloodshed. Min-jae found out and nodded. Then he sat down and wrote letters, those very ones, to General Ko Myung-ho, to Emperor Lee Do-hyun, to the governors of the 3 provinces that bought Tona's pills, to the merchant guilds of the 2 cities. Each letter contained one thing, the truth. 200 of the cartel's recipes with An Chol-su's annotations, the signatures of 4 former alchemists from the House of the White Lily who had defected to Tone over the past 3 years. Test results. Patient testimonials. Numbers. 200 years of deliberately weakened medicines. 6 million coins a year from a single province, for pills that are only 30% effective. Tens of thousands of people kept on a tight leash by false hope. Min-jae sealed the last letter. He affixed the Tone seal, a small impression, a hand holding a pill. Chae-rin had designed it. So-ra had ordered it from a jeweler. The seal left with the caravan that morning. A month later, the world of Hwagyong learned the truth. The reaction was like an avalanche. Slowly at first, then faster and faster. Province after province tore up their contracts with the House of the White Lily. Merchant guilds refused to transport the cartel's pills. Alchemists left the cartel. Not all of them, but enough. Min-jae found Yoon-gwan's diary that same month, in the basement, at the coin market, on the bottom shelf. A book, 1 coin, like everything here. He read all night. By dawn, he knew everything. Yoon-gwan, the apothecary who wept, 400 years ago, from another world, through the door, for a coin. He healed for 20 years. Then he broke down, closed the doors. The empire fell. The last entry, heal everyone, Even enemies, especially enemies, otherwise the doors will close. Min-jae closed the book. He sat in the darkness of the basement. He thought of Hwan, to whom he had sent a pill for his daughter, of Beck, to whom he had given medicine for his son, of the mercenaries whom he had given tea to and let go, of every enemy he had treated instead of beating. He did this not because he knew the rule. He did this because he was an apothecary. A pharmacist doesn't ask who you are when you're sick. He asks where it hurts. The door recognized him not for his strength, but for the fact that he died delivering insulin to a stranger's grandmother at 3 in the morning. Min-jae went upstairs. So Ah was standing by the door, waiting. She was always waiting. He looked at her, said he knew everything now. So Ah asked what? Min-jae answered, why I'm here, because I died the right way. So Ah was silent for a long time. A flower behind her ear, yellow. Mi-yeon had brought it that morning. So Ah wore it every day. Then she said quietly that she was glad the door hadn't made a mistake. Min-jae nodded. The 2 years that followed passed like a river, quickly, powerfully, unstoppably. The union of the 5 provinces, the fall of the White Lily House's monopoly, not destruction, reform. The cartel split. Some went underground, some accepted the new rules, open recipes, fair prices, audits. Min-jae didn't seek revenge, he mended things, like mending a broken bone. The Black Iron Clan split. The southern branch, led by General Ko, left. It joined the alliance. The northern branch retreated. The mines closed. Nam-bi brought 47 children, former numbers. Dan-bi met them at the gate. She hugged each one. The emperor opened the capital's gates. Yuna stood beside her brother, her hands in plain sight. The 5th year. The palace square in Hansong. Min-jae stood on the steps. 19 years on the outside, 46 on the inside. A thin young man in a gray hanbok without embroidery, with a notebook under his arm, with grass stains on his fingers that no soap could wash off, with the eyes of a tired pharmacist on his 3rd shift. His men stood nearby, with A, 28 years old. The scar across his eyebrow had turned white, a sword at his belt, a flower behind her ear. She stood slightly ahead and slightly to the side, between him and the world, just as she always stood, just as she would stand. Chorin, 29 years old, chopsticks in her hair, hands burned by the stove, arguing with An Chor-su in whispers even at the ceremony. Nam-bi, 27 years old, ears perked up, not pressed down. For the first time since Min-jae saw her by the path. Dan-bi beside her, 17 years old, healthy, strong, smiling. Sora, 31 years old, wearing real glasses from Min-jae, with a notebook, with a smile that appeared more and more often. Hae-jin, 30 years old, the state's chief physician, with warm hands and a pouch of herbs at his belt. Yuna, 29 years old, head of the diplomatic council, hands in plain sight, back straight. Father Park stood below, in the crowd, gray-haired, hunchbacked, happy. Next to the miller Pei, who had become head of the neighborhood council of Old Tonegol. Both drank tea from a travel flask, and both were silent with the kind of silence that comes to people who remember where it all began. The 12 clan chiefs ascended the steps. Min-jae was not seated on the throne. There was no throne. He was standing. They bowed. Min-jae bowed in return. Deeper, always deeper. Then he straightened up and asked them for one thing, to open the gates. Everyone, for the refugees from the north, for the half-bloods from the mountain clans, for the children who had been registered as the fading ones, for the old people who had been abandoned, for the women who had been sold, to open the gates and let them in. The first clan leader nodded, the second, all 12. Min-jae turned toward the square. He raised his voice, softly. The square fell silent. He said that from this day forward, in the Hwagyong Empire, the concept of a dying child no longer existed, that no healer would ever again have the right to refuse, that every child would receive help, by name, not by blood, not by status, not by money, by name, silence, then a sound, not applause at first, a sigh, thousands of people at once, as if the square had exhaled, then applause, then shouts, then the square hummed with that rumble that happens when people realize that something has ended and that something has begun. Min-jae wasn't listening. He was looking down, at his father. Father Park was standing there, tea in his hand, tears on his cheeks. He turned to Miller Pa and said something. Min-jae didn't hear the words, but he read his lips. And I told him it wouldn't cure him. I was a fool. Miller Pa laughed. He slapped the doctor on the back. Father Park swayed and laughed too. Minjae smiled. He turned around. He walked down the steps. Soa walked beside him, a sword at her belt, a flower behind her ear. Cherin was behind them. She was still arguing with Unchol-su. Nambi was on the rooftops, a habit she would never give up. Sora was calculating the cost of the ceremony in her notebook and grumbling about overspending. Hejin was carrying a bag of medicine because someone in the crowd feels sick. Yuna was walking with her brother, beside him, not behind, not ahead, beside him. Minjae came down. He walked through the crowd. People parted. They bowed. He bowed in return, to everyone, like a pharmacist bows to a patient, with respect, with attention, with that one promise he made every day. I see you. I know what you need. He reached his father, stood beside him. His father held out a flask. Minjae took it, took a sip. Sage, licorice, hard water, 20% effective, the most delicious tea in both of his lives. They stood there, father and son, in silence. The square buzzed around them. People laughed and cried and hugged each other, and they just stood there and drank tea. Minjae returned the flask. He said he had to go. Tomorrow was Jung-suk's birthday, the boy he had saved with a pear-flavored lollipop. 11 years old, he still loved honey-coated flatbreads, and Minjae had promised him a cake, and a promise made to a child is more important than any decree. His father nodded. Then he told his son to put plenty of honey in the cake. Minjae replied that he would. He walked across the square, past the palace steps, past the banners, past the people bowing, to the little bakery on the corner that the grandmother from Gyeongho had opened, the very same village that had been burned down 3 years ago. The grandmother had survived. She made it to Ton. She opened a bakery, the best flatbreads in town. Minjae walked in. The grandmother saw him. She clapped her hands. He said he needed a cake, a big one, with honey, for tomorrow. The grandmother said that for Mr. Park, anything was possible. Minjae asked her not to call him Mr., just Minjae. Grandma shook her head. She said she couldn't, because he had saved her grandson, and that to her, he would be Mr. Park until the end of her days. Minjae didn't argue. Soa stood at the bakery door, a sword at her belt, a flower behind her ear. It was starting to snow, the first snow of this winter. Light, quiet, falling on the roofs and the square and the walls and the people. Minjae stepped out. He lifted his face. Snowflakes melted on his cheeks, pink, alive. He stood there and breathed, and thought that somewhere in another world there was an icy bridge, and a pharmacist who had slipped, and a grandmother who was waiting for insulin, and that maybe in that world too, someone is standing on the bridge right now, carrying medicine, at 3 in the morning, for a stranger, and that a door is waiting somewhere. So Ah touched his shoulder, quietly. She said it was snowing, that it was cold, that they needed to go home. Minjae nodded. They walked down the snow-covered street, the two of them, the pharmacist and the swordswoman, the short one and the tall one, the notebook and the sword. He walked and didn't look back, because behind them lay the square and the edict and the clans and the empire, and ahead lay a cake for Jung-suk, and that was more important, because an empire stands on edicts, but the world stands on the fact that someone remembers that it's the boy's birthday tomorrow, and that he loves honey. The snow was falling, quiet, warm, like a blanket, like that first night when his father sat next to the mat and didn't blink, like a hand on his head, like a washed bowl on the threshold, like a flower behind his ear. Minjae was walking home. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, he had a place that was called that. Home.